Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. On a cold November morning in 1994, FBI Special Agent Zephaniah Crankshaw stepped into the federal building in Chicago's Loop District earlier than usual. This 52-year-old veteran agent had encountered countless dark cases during his 26-year career at the FBI, but the file waiting for him on his desk that morning was the kind that would test even his resilience. A red stamp in large letters was printed on the folder's faded manila surface. Urgent, confidential. Inside was a report prepared by the Chicago Police Department. The report contained information about a horrific discovery made during routine maintenance in one of the city's abandoned subway tunnels. While cleaning a section of tunnel that hadn't been used since the 1920s, the workers had encountered an unbearable stench. The smell was so intense that one of the workers had fainted, requiring emergency medical attention. Crankshaw adjusted his reading glasses and buried himself in the report. The construction crew had initially thought it was sewage seeping in or animal carcasses that had entered the tunnel and died. But when they returned with proper lighting and breathing masks, what they saw defied any logical explanation. Behind a partially collapsed brick wall, they had found things resembling human remains. Moreover, this was not just a single corpse. The bones were not scattered randomly, but seemed to have been carefully placed and arranged. The detective who'd written the initial report, a woman named Sophronia Wigglesworth, had included photographs that made Crankshaw's coffee turn sour in his stomach. The bones weren't just scattered. They were organized, almost catalogued. Skulls lined one wall like grotesque trophies. Femurs and tibias were stacked like cordwood. Smaller bones filled what appeared to be old wooden crates stamped with dates from the Prohibition era. Detective Wigglesworth had done her homework. She'd cross-referenced missing persons reports dating back decades, noting that Chicago had an unusually high number of unsolved disappearances compared to other major cities. People who'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind worried families and cold case files that gathered dust in the department's archives. The detective theorized that someone, or more likely, a group of someones, had been using Chicago's vast network of abandoned tunnels as a body disposal site for years, possibly decades. The FBI's involvement had been requested because of the scope and the possibility of interstate crimes. Several of the missing persons had last been seen near the Illinois border, and at least 3 had connections to organized crime families that operated across state lines. But there was something else that had caught the federal government's attention, something that Detective Wigglesworth had only hinted at in her report. Crankshaw picked up his phone and dialed the number scrawled at the bottom of the report. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered, "Wigglesworth here." "Detective, this is Special Agent Crankshaw with the FBI. I've just finished reading your report about the tunnel discovery." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Wigglesworth spoke again, her voice was lower, more cautious. "Agent Crankshaw, I was hoping you'd call. There's more to this than what I put in the official report. I suspected as much. Your final paragraph mentioned additional concerns requiring federal oversight. Care to elaborate?" "Not over the phone," Wigglesworth said quickly. "Can you meet me at the site? There's something you need to see for yourself, something we didn't photograph." 2 hours later, Crankshaw found himself descending into the bowels of Chicago's underground. The entrance was innocuous enough. a maintenance door in the basement of an abandoned warehouse on the south side. The building had been condemned for years, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. Nobody would think twice about it, which, Crankshaw realized, was probably the point. Detective Wigglesworth was waiting for him at the bottom of a rusted metal staircase. She was younger than her voice had suggested, perhaps 35, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She handed him a flashlight and a dust mask. "The smell's not as bad now that we've had ventilation running for 48 hours, she said, leading him down a narrow corridor. "But you'll still want the mask once we get deeper." They walked in silence for several minutes, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The tunnel system was more extensive than Crankshaw had imagined. Side passages branched off in multiple directions, creating a labyrinth beneath the city streets. Water dripped from unseen pipes, and occasionally Crankshaw could hear the rumble of a subway train somewhere in the distance. "How did the construction workers even find this section?" he asked. "City's been planning to expand the L for years," Wigglesworth replied. "They were doing structural surveys, checking which old tunnels could be repurposed. This whole section was supposed to have been sealed off in 1925, but the wall they found had been modified. Someone had been maintaining access. They turned a corner, and the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Portable LED lights had been set up, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Yellow crime scene tape crisscrossed the space, and Crankshaw could see evidence markers scattered throughout. But it was the far wall that drew his attention. The bones were exactly as the photographs had depicted, arranged with an unsettling precision that spoke of method and purpose. But now, seeing them in person, Crankshaw noticed details the camera hadn't captured. Some of the skulls showed signs of surgical intervention, clean cuts through bone that suggested medical knowledge rather than crude violence. Dr. Mahitable Uppercrust from the medical examiner's office has been analyzing the remains, Wigglesworth said, following his gaze. She's identified at least 47 distinct individuals so far, but she thinks there could be more. Some of the bones are too degraded to separate properly. 47? Crankshaw felt his throat tighten. The report mentioned 15 to 20. That was our initial estimate. We've found 2 more chambers since then, but that's not what I wanted to show you. Wigglesworth gestured for him to follow her to a corner of the room where a blue tarp covered something on the ground. She knelt down and carefully pulled back the tarp. Underneath was a metal briefcase, its surface corroded with age but still intact. The case was open, revealing stacks of yellowed documents, photographs, and what appeared to be surgical instruments. "We found this hidden behind a false panel," Wigglesworth explained. "The documents, they're medical records, patient files from hospitals all over Chicago, dating back to the 1940s. But here's the thing. Every single patient in these files was reported missing within a year of their hospital discharge." Crankshaw picked up one of the files with gloved hands. The patient was a young woman named Margaret Thompson, admitted to Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital in 1953 for appendicitis. According to the file, she'd made a full recovery and was discharged after 5 days. A handwritten note in the margin, in different ink, read, "Suitable candidate. Blood type O negative. No family inquiries expected." "There's more," Wigglesworth said. She pulled out a photograph from the bottom of the case. It was old, black and white, showing a group of men in surgical attire standing in what appeared to be an operating room. But the room wasn't in a hospital. The rough brick walls visible in the background looked exactly like the tunnels they were standing in. "We think someone was performing medical procedures down here," she continued. "Off-the-books operations that required subjects who wouldn't be missed." Crankshaw studied the photograph more closely. One of the faces seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. The man was tall, distinguished-looking, with the bearing of someone used to authority. A small pin on his surgical gown caught the light, some kind of medical insignia or fraternal organization symbol. "Have you identified any of these men?" "Not yet, but we're cross-referencing with hospital staff records from that era. The problem is, many of those records were destroyed in a fire at the city archives in 1978. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" A sound echoed through the tunnel, metallic, rhythmic, like footsteps on a metal grate. Both Crankshaw and Wigglesworth tensed, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. "That's not one of my people," Wigglesworth whispered. "We cleared this section and posted guards at all known entrances." The footsteps grew closer, seeming to come from one of the side passages they'd passed earlier. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more unnerving than the noise had been. Crankshaw drew his service weapon, motioning for Wigglesworth to cover the main tunnel while he approached the side passage. His flashlight beam penetrated the darkness, revealing nothing but empty tunnels stretching into blackness. But there, on the ground, were fresh footprints in the dust. Footprints that led deeper into the tunnel system, into areas that hadn't yet been explored. "We're not alone down here," he said quietly. Wigglesworth joined him, her own weapon drawn. The construction workers reported seeing someone the day before they found the bones. A man in old-fashioned clothing who vanished when they called out to him. "We assumed it was a homeless person, but homeless people don't usually wear vintage medical attire," Crankshaw finished, noting the partial footprint that showed what appeared to be the sole of an old-style surgical shoe. They followed the footprints for about 50 yards before the trail disappeared at an intersection of 3 tunnels. Each passage led in a different direction, and their flashlights couldn't penetrate far enough to see where any of them ended. "We need a full tactical team down here," Crankshaw said, "and we need to seal every possible exit. If someone's still using these tunnels—" A distant sound interrupted him, a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly, and dust drifted down from the ceiling. "That's not the subway," Wigglesworth said, checking her watch. "No trains run on this side of the city at this time." The rumbling continued for several more seconds before fading away, leaving them in oppressive silence once again. Crankshaw noticed that the air had grown colder, and their breath was now visible in small puffs of vapor. "We're leaving. Now," he ordered. "We'll come back with a full team and proper equipment." They retreated quickly but carefully, keeping their weapons drawn and checking behind them frequently. It wasn't until they emerged into the gray November daylight that Crankshaw allowed himself to relax slightly. "Detective, I want everything you have on this case sent to my office immediately," he said. "Every file, every photograph, every theory you've developed, and I want a list of everyone who knows about this discovery." "Already compiled," Wigglesworth said, handing him a flash drive. "But Agent Crankshaw, there's one more thing you should know. That symbol on the surgeon's pin in the photograph? I've seen it before. My grandmother worked as a nurse at Cook County Hospital in the 1950s. She used to tell stories about a group of doctors who called themselves the Hippocratic Brotherhood. They supposedly performed experimental procedures that the hospital board wouldn't approve. Experimental procedures. Transplants, mostly. This was before anti-rejection drugs were developed, before the first successful kidney transplant in 1954. My grandmother said they were obsessed with the idea of extending human life through organ replacement. She also said that patients would sometimes disappear from the hospital, and the administration would claim they'd been transferred or discharged, but no one ever saw the paperwork. Crankshaw felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Medical experiments, missing persons, a secret organization operating in Chicago's underground, it all pointed to something far more sinister than simple serial killings. "I need you to find your grandmother's records," he said. "Any documentation she might have kept from her time at the hospital. And detective, be careful. If this brotherhood still exists, if they're still active after all these years, they've managed to stay hidden for a reason. They won't hesitate to protect their secrets." That evening, Crankshaw sat in his office reviewing the files Wigglesworth had sent over. The sheer volume of information was staggering. Missing persons reports, medical records, architectural blueprints of Chicago's underground tunnel system, and dozens of photographs documenting the gruesome discovery. But it was a single name that kept appearing in the margins of various documents that caught his attention. Dr. Mehitable Uppercrust. The medical examiner had been thorough in her initial analysis, but Crankshaw wanted to speak with her directly. He found her still at work in the Cook County Medical Examiner's office, hunched over a metal examination table, where several bones were laid out in anatomical order. Dr. Uppercrust was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen too much death to be shocked by anything anymore. She looked up as Crankshaw entered, pulling off her latex gloves with practiced efficiency. "Agent Crankshaw, I presume? Detective Wigglesworth mentioned you'd taken over the federal investigation." "That's correct, Doctor. I understand you've made some unusual findings regarding these remains." She gestured for him to follow her to a side room where more bones were stored in the labeled boxes. "Unusual doesn't begin to cover it. I've been a medical examiner for 35 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Come, let me show you." She pulled out several specimens, handling them with the careful reverence one might show to sacred relics. First, the age range of these victims is remarkably specific, all between 18 and 35 years old, all in relatively good health before death, based on bone density and lack of chronic disease markers. But here's where it gets interesting. She picked up a section of rib cage, pointing to several clean cuts through the bone. These incisions were made with surgical precision. Not the work of a killer trying to dismember a body, but rather someone performing a medical procedure. See how the cuts avoid major blood vessels. This person knew exactly what they were doing. "Could they have been organ harvesting?" Crankshaw asked, though the thought made his skin crawl. "That was my first thought, but it doesn't quite fit. Organ harvesting, even illegal operations, requires speed. These procedures were methodical, almost experimental. Look here." She showed him another bone with unusual markings. These scratches indicate repeated procedures. Someone was practicing, perfecting their technique. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young assistant entered, looking pale and shaken. "Dr. Uppercrust, you need to see this. We found something in one of the skull cavities." They followed the assistant to another examination room where a skull sat under bright surgical lights. Using tweezers, the assistant extracted something small and metallic from inside the cranium. It was a tiny capsule, no bigger than a pill, with numbers etched into its surface. "It's a patient identifier," Dr. Uppercrust breathed. Hospitals used these in the 1940s and 50s for psychiatric patients who might not be able to identify themselves. The numbers would correspond to their medical files. Crankshaw felt his pulse quicken. "Can we trace it?" "If the hospital records still exist, yes. But Agent Crankshaw, if someone was taking psychiatric patients for experimentation..." She trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Crankshaw's phone buzzed. It was a text from Detective Wigglesworth. Found something. Meet me at 1847 South Halsted. Come alone. Trust no one else." The address led him to an abandoned building in Chicago's old medical district. The area had once been home to several hospitals and medical schools, but urban decay had left many structures empty and deteriorating. Wigglesworth's unmarked car was parked outside, and Crankshaw found her waiting in what had, once, been a lobby, now stripped of everything but peeling wallpaper and broken tiles. "This used to be the Hahnemann Medical College," she said without preamble. "Closed in 1993, but it had a long history before that. My grandmother's records mention this place specifically. The Hippocratic Brotherhood held their meetings here." She led him through debris-strewn hallways to a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The lock had been recently broken, and fresh scratches on the floor suggested the door had been opened within the past few days. "Someone else knows about this place," Crankshaw observed. "That's what worries me," Wigglesworth replied. "I think we're not the only ones investigating these tunnels." Behind the door, a staircase descended into darkness. They made their way down carefully, the air growing thicker and more oppressive with each step. At the bottom, they found themselves in a sub-basement that connected to the tunnel system. But unlike the rough brick passages they'd explored earlier, this area had been finished. Tiled walls, fluorescent light fixtures, though long, dead, and what appeared to be abandoned medical equipment. "This is it," Wigglesworth whispered. "This is where they operated." The main room was large, perhaps 40 feet square, with a raised platform in the center where an operating table still stood. Leather restraints hung from its sides, cracked and brittle with age. Around the room's perimeter were glass cabinets, many still containing surgical instruments and medicine bottles with faded labels. But it was the walls that made Crankshaw's blood run cold. They were covered in photographs, hundreds of them showing patients in various stages of surgical procedures. Some conscious, their faces contorted in agony. Others mercifully unconscious. All had the same identifying numbers visible that matched the format of the capsule they'd found in the skull. "My God," Wigglesworth breathed. "They documented everything." A sound from the tunnels made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching rapidly. Crankshaw drew his weapon, pushing Wigglesworth behind him. The footsteps stopped just outside the room, and then a voice called out. Elderly, cultured, with a slight tremor. "I know you're in there. Please don't shoot. I'm unarmed, and I need to tell someone the truth before it's too late." An old man appeared in the doorway, hands raised. He was perhaps 80 years old, wearing an expensive but dated suit. His face was gaunt, his eyes haunted by decades of secrets. "My name is Hezekiah Mullenix," he said. I was part of this. Not by choice, not at first, but I was involved. And they're still active. The Brotherhood never ended. They just got better at hiding." Crankshaw kept his weapon trained on the man. "You're saying this organization still exists?" Mullenix nodded shakily. "They've modernized, adapted. No more crude experiments in tunnels. Now they have private facilities, offshore operations, but they still use the old tunnels for disposal. And they have people everywhere. Hospitals, government, even law enforcement." "Why are you telling us this now?" Wigglesworth demanded. "Because I'm dying," Mullenix said simply. "Pancreatic cancer, weeks to live, maybe less. And I can't take these secrets to my grave. But you have to understand, they know you've found the tunnels. They're probably watching us right now." As if on cue, Crankshaw's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join the collection." "We need to get out of here," Mullenix urged. They'll seal us in if we stay too long. It's happened before. Investigators who got too close simply vanished. Listed as missing persons, their bodies added to the collection. They moved quickly back through the tunnels, Mullenix struggling to keep pace despite the urgency. As they climbed the stairs back to the abandoned medical college, he wheezed out more information. The Brotherhood started in the 1920s. Doctors who believed that death was a disease that could be cured. They thought organ transplantation was the key, but the technology didn't exist yet. So they experimented, using the city's forgotten people. Immigrants, psychiatric patients, anyone who wouldn't be missed. They reached the main floor, and Crankshaw could see their cars through the broken windows. But something was wrong. There were more vehicles now, black SUVs with tinted windows, engines running. "It's them," Mullenix gasped. "The cleanup crew." "Is there another way out?" Crankshaw asked. "The old morgue tunnel. It connects to the hospital next door." They rushed through the building, Mullenix directing them despite his labored breathing. Behind them, Crankshaw could hear doors being kicked open, heavy footsteps on the floors above. The morgue tunnel was narrow and partially collapsed, forcing them to crawl in places. Wigglesworth went first, then Mullenix, with Crankshaw bringing up the rear. They emerged in the basement of another abandoned building, this one scheduled for demolition. Crankshaw immediately called for backup, but when he gave their location, the dispatcher seemed confused. "Sir, there's no record of an Agent Crankshaw in our system. Please identify yourself properly." His blood ran cold. They were being erased from the system even as they ran. He hung up and tried his direct supervisor, but the line was dead. "They're cutting us off," he told the others. "We need to get to—" The sound of a gunshot cut through the air. Mullenix crumpled to the ground, blood spreading across his white shirt. Standing in the doorway was a figure in surgical scrubs and a mask, holding a silenced pistol. Crankshaw fired twice, and the figure dropped. When he pulled off the mask, he found himself looking at a young man, perhaps 30, with the cold, dead eyes of a true believer. "There'll be more," Wigglesworth said, checking Mullenix's pulse. The old man was still alive, but fading fast. "The evidence," Mullenix gasped, gripping Crankshaw's arm with surprising strength. "Hidden. My house. 4829 North Sheridan. Floor safe. Combination is—" His voice faded to a whisper, and Crankshaw had to lean close to hear the numbers. Then Mullenix was gone, his secrets dying with him. But not all of them. "We need to get to that house," Crankshaw said. "Before they do." They commandeered a city maintenance truck parked nearby, hoping it would be less conspicuous than their own vehicles. As they drove through Chicago's streets, Crankshaw noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. Cameras on every corner, unmarked vans at strategic intersections, people in medical scrubs who seemed to be watching rather than walking. The Sheridan address was a brownstone in an upscale neighborhood, the kind of place where old money lived quietly and asked no questions. They entered through the back, Crankshaw picking the lock with skills he'd learned in his younger days with the Bureau. The house was pristine, as if Mullenix had expected to return to it. They found the safe exactly where he'd said it would be, hidden beneath a Persian rug in his study. Inside were documents that made everything else pale in comparison. Financial records showing payments to judges, police commissioners, hospital administrators. Lists of subjects dating back decades, with notations about their medical conditions and eventual fates. And most damning of all, a current membership roster of the Hippocratic Brotherhood, including names Crankshaw recognized, prominent surgeons, medical researchers, even a senator. "This is it," Wigglesworth said. "This is enough to bring them all down." But Crankshaw wasn't so sure. The Brotherhood had survived for nearly a century by being careful, by having contingency plans. Even now, he could feel the weight of their surveillance, the sense that they were being watched and evaluated. "We need copies of everything," he said. "Multiple copies sent to different agencies, different media outlets. Make it impossible for them to suppress." They worked quickly, photographing document, scanning pages, uploading everything to secure cloud servers. But as they worked, Crankshaw noticed something in the membership roster that made his heart skip. There, among the most recent additions, was a name he knew all too well. A name that explained why their investigation was being hampered at every turn. Why the Brotherhood always seemed one step ahead. The name was his own supervisor at the FBI. "We can't trust anyone," he said to Wigglesworth. "Not the Bureau, not the police. No one." She met his eyes, and he saw the same realization dawning on her. They weren't investigating a crime. They were trapped in the middle of an ongoing conspiracy, one that reached to the highest levels of power. Outside, the sound of sirens began to grow closer. But Crankshaw knew they weren't coming to help. The Brotherhood was closing in, ready to add 2 more bodies to their collection in the tunnels beneath Chicago. "There's one more thing," Wigglesworth said, pulling out her phone. "I've been recording everything since we entered the first tunnel. Every conversation, every discovery. If something happens to us, at least there'll be a record." She hit send on an email, transmitting the recordings to a journalist she trusted, someone outside Chicago who might be able to tell their story if they couldn't. The sirens were right outside now. Crankshaw could see the flashing lights through the windows, hear the sound of car doors slamming, footsteps on the front porch. "Back door," he said. But when they reached it, more officers were already there, weapons drawn. They were trapped. The officers at the back door weren't wearing standard Chicago PD uniforms. Crankshaw noticed it immediately. The badges were slightly wrong, the equipment too new, too specialized. These weren't real cops. They were Brotherhood operatives dressed for the part. "Detective Wigglesworth," he whispered. "When I give the signal, hit the floor." She gave an almost imperceptible nod. Crankshaw's hand moved to his service weapon, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Instead, he raised his hand slowly, appearing to surrender. "We're federal agents," he called out. "Agent Crankshaw and Detective Wigglesworth. We're coming out." The moment they stepped through the doorway, Crankshaw spotted what he was looking for: a gas meter on the side of the house. In one fluid motion, he drew his weapon and fired 3 shots. The first 2 shattered the meter's housing. The third created the spark. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. The fake officers dove for cover as natural gas erupted in a controlled blast, windows shattering, car alarms screaming to life throughout the neighborhood. In the chaos, Crankshaw and Wigglesworth ran. They sprinted through backyards, vaulted fences, and cut through alleys. Behind them, shouts and footsteps, but the explosion had bought them precious seconds. Real police sirens were approaching now. Neighbors had called 911, and the actual Chicago PD was responding to what they thought was a gas leak explosion. They emerged onto a busy street 3 blocks away, blending into the crowd of curious onlookers heading toward the commotion. Crankshaw spotted a taxi and flagged it down. "Union Station," he told the driver. "Quickly." As the taxi pulled away, Wigglesworth was already on her phone, but not making calls. She was uploading everything: photos, recordings, documents, to multiple cloud services, news outlets, and federal databases outside Chicago's jurisdiction. "If they want to bury this, they'll have to bury half the internet," she muttered. But Crankshaw wasn't listening. He was thinking about the membership list, about his supervisor, about how deep this went. The Brotherhood had survived for a century, by infiltrating the very systems meant to stop them. They were the watchers and the watched, the hunters and the hunted. At Union Station, they didn't board a train. Instead, Crankshaw led them to a locker bank where he kept an emergency cache, fake IDs, burner phones, paranoid preparations from his early days in the Bureau that he'd never thought he'd need. "We have to disappear," he said, "at least until those documents go public." "No," Wigglesworth said firmly. "We need one more piece of evidence, something they can't deny or explain away." "What are you talking about?" "The tunnels. There's someone still down there. The footsteps we heard, the fresh tracks. Someone's been living in those tunnels, maintaining the site. If we can find them, get their testimony." Crankshaw wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Documents could be forged, photographs doctored, recordings dismissed. But a living witness, especially one who'd been part of the operation, that would be undeniable. They ditched the taxi and stole a delivery van from a nearby parking garage. As they drove back toward the tunnel system, Wigglesworth pulled up architectural plans on her phone. "There are 17 known entrances to that section of tunnels," she said, "but the blueprints show at least 3 more that were supposedly sealed. If someone's living down there, they'd use one of the sealed entrances to avoid detection." They found what they were looking for in an abandoned subway maintenance yard on the south side. A rusted metal shed that should have been empty instead showed signs of recent use. Fresh scratches on the lock, footprints in the dust, and when Crankshaw pressed his ear to the door, the faint sound of air circulation from below. The lock was new, high security, but Wigglesworth produced a set of bolt cutters from the van. Inside, hidden beneath a false floor, was a modern ladder descending into darkness. Fresh air was being pumped down through hidden vents, and electric cables ran along the walls. They descended carefully, weapons drawn. The tunnel at the bottom was different from the others they'd explored. Cleaner, with working lights and signs of habitation. They could hear something ahead, a rhythmic sound like typing on a keyboard. The tunnel opened into a chamber that had been converted into a living space. Computer equipment lined one wall, medical supplies another. And seated at a desk, apparently unsurprised by their arrival, was a man in his 70s wearing a worn lab coat. "I've been expecting you," he said without turning around. "Though I thought you'd arrive sooner." "Who are you?" Crankshaw demanded, weapon trained on the man's back. The man turned slowly, and Wigglesworth gasped. It was a face from the old photographs, aged but unmistakable. One of the surgeons from the Hippocratic Brotherhood's historical records. "Dr. Ebenezer Thistlethwaite," the man said, "though I haven't used that name in 40 years. These days, I'm just the keeper." "The keeper of what?" "The records. The truth, the evidence that even the Brotherhood doesn't know exists." He gestured to the computers. "Every procedure, every victim, every member for the past century. I've documented it all." "You were part of it," Wigglesworth accused. "You participated in those experiments." "I was young and foolish," Thistlethwaite admitted. "I believed we were advancing medical science, saving lives. It wasn't until I saw what we really were, murderers hiding behind medical degrees, that I tried to leave. But you don't leave the Brotherhood, not alive. So you faked your death? In a way. I volunteered to become the keeper, to maintain the disposal sites and records. They thought I was still loyal, just broken by the work. They never suspected I was documenting everything, building a case that could destroy them." "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" Crankshaw asked. Thistlethwaite laughed bitterly. "The authorities? Agent Crankshaw, the Brotherhood is the authorities. Judges, police commissioners, FBI directors. They've all been members or been paid off. I needed to wait for the right moment, the right people. He stood up, moving to a wall safe Crankshaw hadn't noticed. Inside were hard drives, each labeled with dates spanning decades. "Everything's here," Thistlethwaite said. Video recordings of procedures, audio of planning sessions, financial records showing the full scope of their operation. Not just Chicago, they've spread to every major city in America. Then why haven't you released it? Because they have a fail-safe. If the Brotherhood's existence is ever truly threatened, they'll activate Protocol 7, which is a biological weapon, something they developed in the 1960s and have been refining ever since. It's dispersed through the water supply of every major city where they operate. The antidote is distributed monthly to members and essential personnel. If Protocol 7 is activated, millions will die within days, and only the Brotherhood will survive to rebuild. Crankshaw felt the weight of this revelation settle on him like a physical force. They weren't just fighting a conspiracy, they were facing potential genocide. "There has to be a way to stop them," Wigglesworth said. "There is," Thistlethwaite said, "but it requires getting to their central facility. It's hidden beneath the old Chicago stockyards. That's where they keep the Protocol 7 samples and the antidote production facility. Destroy that, and you destroy their leverage. You're talking about a frontal assault on a fortified position held by an organization with unlimited resources," Crankshaw pointed out. "No," Thistlethwaite corrected. "I'm talking about infiltration. There's a gathering tomorrow night. An emergency meeting called because of your investigation. Every senior member will be there. Security will be focused on keeping people out, not watching those already inside." He pulled out a case containing medical supplies and surgical gear. "I can get you in, but you'll have to look the part. And once inside, you'll have one chance to upload their entire database to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency simultaneously, while destroying the Protocol 7 storage." "That's suicide," Wigglesworth said. "Perhaps. But what's the alternative? Let them continue for another century? How many more bodies in those tunnels? How many more experiments? How many more families destroyed?" Crankshaw looked at the evidence surrounding them, thought about the bones in the tunnels, the photographs of victims, the systematic evil that had been operating under Chicago's streets for generations. "What do we need to do?" Thistlethwaite began explaining the layout of the facility, the security protocols, the identification systems. As he spoke, Crankshaw realized they were planning what might be their last operation. But Wigglesworth was already preparing, checking weapons, studying the facility plans. "There's one more thing," Thistlethwaite said. "The current leader of the Brotherhood, the Grand Physician they call him, he's someone you know, Agent Crankshaw. My supervisor, no, higher, much higher. Someone who's been protecting the Brotherhood from federal investigation for 20 years. He showed them a photograph from a recent Brotherhood gathering. In the center, wearing ceremonial medical robes, was the deputy director of the FBI himself. He's been directing investigations away from the Brotherhood, ensuring that any agent who got too close was either recruited or eliminated," Thistlethwaite explained. "Your supervisor was just middle management. This goes all the way to the top." The weight of their situation became even clearer. They weren't just cut off from support, they were actively being hunted by their own agencies. But that also meant exposing the Brotherhood would bring down some of the most powerful people in the country. "The gathering is tomorrow at midnight," Thistlethwaite said. "We'll enter through the old cattle tunnels. Once inside, we'll have approximately 30 minutes before the ceremony begins. That's our window." They spent the rest of the night preparing. Thistlethwaite taught them the Brotherhood's recognition signals, passwords, and protocols. He showed them how to wear the surgical gowns properly, how to move with the confident authority of someone who belonged. As dawn approached, exhaustion was setting in, but adrenaline kept them sharp. They reviewed the plan one more time: enter through the tunnels, access the mainframe, upload everything while Wigglesworth planted charges in the Protocol 7 storage area. "What about you?" Crankshaw asked Thistlethwaite. "I'll ensure you get out." "I've lived in these shadows for 40 years. It's time I stepped into the light, even if it burns me." They moved the equipment to a staging area closer to the stockyards. The abandoned meatpacking district was a maze of empty buildings and rusted machinery, perfect cover for their approach. But as they set up their base, Crankshaw noticed something troubling: fresh tire tracks in the dust, cigarette butts that weren't completely weathered. "We're not alone," he warned. Thistlethwaite checked his monitors, devices he'd hidden throughout the tunnels over the years. Movement in Sectors 7 and 12, they're sweeping the tunnels. "They know we're coming?" "No, this is standard protocol when there's a gathering." They clear the tunnels of homeless urban explorers, anyone who might stumble onto something. "Then we wait," Wigglesworth said. "Let them finish their sweep." They spent the day in tense silence, taking turns keeping watch. Crankshaw used the time to review everything they'd learned, every piece of evidence. The Brotherhood had started as a group of idealistic doctors trying to push the boundaries of medical science, but somewhere along the way they'd lost their humanity. They'd become the very disease they'd sought to cure. As evening fell, Thistlethwaite made final preparations. He gave them each a small device, no bigger than a button. "Emergency beacon," he explained. "One press sends our location and a distress signal to every news organization in the country. It won't save us, but it'll ensure they can't cover this up." At 11 p.m., they entered the tunnels. Thistlethwaite led them through passages Crankshaw hadn't seen before, some so narrow they had to crawl, others that opened into vast chambers that echoed with their footsteps. The closer they got to the stockyards, the more modern the tunnels became. Concrete instead of brick, LED lights instead of darkness. They could hear the gathering before they saw it. Voices echoing through the tunnels, footsteps on metal stairs. Thistlethwaite led them to a maintenance alcove where surgical gowns and masks were stored. "Remember," he whispered, "confidence is key. You belong here. You've always belonged here." They emerged into a corridor filled with figures in identical surgical attire. Crankshaw's heart pounded, but he forced himself to walk calmly, purposefully. Several people nodded to them in passing, accepting their presence without question. The main chamber was massive, a repurposed cold storage facility from the stockyard's operational days. Hundreds of Brotherhood members were gathering, their surgical masks making them anonymous, identical. At the far end, a raised platform held what looked like an operating theater, complete with lights and equipment. "The mainframe is through there," Thistlethwaite whispered, indicating a side door. "Protocol 7 storage is below, accessed through the freight elevator." They split up. Wigglesworth headed for the elevator while Crankshaw and Thistlethwaite approached the mainframe room. The door required a key card, which Thistlethwaite produced from his gown. Inside, servers hummed with decades of data. Crankshaw inserted the drive Thistlethwaite had prepared, beginning the upload process. A progress bar appeared on the screen, 15 minutes to complete. "Too long," Crankshaw muttered. "It has to upload everything," Thistlethwaite said. "Every document, every video, every piece of evidence. This is our only chance." Through the door, they could hear the gathering reaching its crescendo. Someone was speaking, a voice Crankshaw recognized, the deputy director. "Brothers and sisters of the Hippocratic Brotherhood," the voice boomed. "Tonight, we face our greatest threat. But we have faced threats before and survived. We will survive again because we are evolution itself. We are the future of humanity, freed from the weakness of mortality." The upload continued its slow progress. 10 minutes remaining, then 8, then 5. An alarm suddenly pierced the air. Not from the mainframe room, but from below. Wigglesworth had been discovered. The alarm shrieked through the facility, and Crankshaw could hear the chaos erupting in the main chamber. 3 minutes remained on the upload. He couldn't leave it now. "Go help her," Thistlethwaite said, already barricading the door. "I'll ensure this finishes." "They'll kill you." "I've been dead for 40 years, Agent. Go." Crankshaw ran for the freight elevator, following the signs Wigglesworth had left. Small chalk marks on the walls, a system they developed during their planning. The elevator was still on the lower level. He hit the call button and waited precious seconds that felt like hours. When the doors opened, he found blood on the floor. Not much, but enough to know someone was hurt. He followed the trail through a maze of storage rooms filled with medical equipment that belonged in a museum. Iron lungs, primitive dialysis machines, surgical tools from bygone eras. The trail led to a massive refrigerated storage area. Inside, the temperature was near freezing, and his breath came out in clouds. Along the walls were hundreds of sealed containers, each labeled with dates and identification numbers. Protocol 7. He found Wigglesworth behind a row of containers, pressing her hand against a wound in her shoulder. Beside her lay a Brotherhood member, unconscious or dead. "He came out of nowhere," she gasped, "but I got the charges placed." "We have maybe 10 minutes before—" The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. They could hear footsteps approaching, many of them. "Can you move?" Crankshaw asked. She nodded, though her face was pale from blood loss. He helped her to her feet, and they moved deeper into the storage area, looking for another exit. Behind them, voices echoed off the metal walls. "The intruders are here! Seal all exits. Protocol 7 must be protected." They found a service tunnel at the back of the storage area, barely wide enough for one person. Wigglesworth went first, leaving bloody handprints on the walls. Crankshaw followed, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. The tunnel emerged into an old drainage system, ankle-deep water flowing toward the Chicago River. They could hear the Brotherhood members entering the tunnel behind them, but the narrow space would slow them down. The upload, Wigglesworth gasped as they waded through the filthy water. Did it finish? "I don't know." Thistlethwaite stayed behind to... An explosion rocked the tunnel system. Not Wigglesworth's charges. This came from above, the mainframe room. Thistlethwaite had destroyed the servers after the upload completed, ensuring the Brotherhood couldn't stop the transmission. "He did it," Crankshaw said. "He got it all out." They emerged from a drainage grate near the Chicago River, just as more explosions erupted behind them. Wigglesworth's charges had detonated, destroying the Protocol 7 storage. Fire and smoke poured from ventilation shafts across the old stockyards district. But their relief was short-lived. Black SUVs were converging on their position, Brotherhood cleanup crews responding to the emergency. Crankshaw pressed the emergency beacon Thistlethwaite had given them, then pulled Wigglesworth toward the river. "Can you swim?" "Do I have a choice?" They jumped. The cold water was shocking, but it also helped slow Wigglesworth's bleeding. They let the current carry them downstream, surfacing only when their lungs demanded air. Behind them, flashlights swept the water's surface, but the river was dark and wide. They pulled themselves out near Navy Pier, where late-night tourists provided cover. A taxi driver, seeing their condition, initially refused to pick them up until Crankshaw showed his FBI badge and promised triple fare. "Northwestern Memorial Hospital," he said. "Federal emergency." But when they arrived, Crankshaw didn't take Wigglesworth to the emergency room. Instead, he called a doctor he knew, someone he'd helped years ago with a witness protection situation. Dr. Sarah Chen met them at a side entrance, asked no questions, and treated Wigglesworth's wound in a closed wing of the hospital. While Wigglesworth recovered, Crankshaw watched the news on his phone. The uploads had worked. Every major news outlet was running the story. Secret medical conspiracy discovered in Chicago. The footage, documents, and evidence were spreading faster than anyone could suppress them. By morning, federal agents, real ones from outside Chicago, were swarming the city. The deputy director had been arrested at his home, along with dozens of other Brotherhood members. The tunnel system was being excavated, bodies recovered and identified. But Crankshaw knew it wasn't over. The Brotherhood had operated for a century. They had resources, connections, contingency plans. Some would escape, go underground, rebuild elsewhere. 3 days later, Crankshaw and Wigglesworth testified before a closed Senate committee. They told everything: the tunnels, the experiments, Protocol 7, the infiltration of law enforcement. The senators listened in horrified silence. "How many victims?" one finally asked. "At least 400 that we can confirm," Wigglesworth answered. "Possibly thousands more over the century of their operation." "And the surviving members?" "Scattered," Crankshaw said. "We've arrested over 200, but we estimate at least 50 senior members escaped. They could be anywhere, under new identities." The investigation continued for months. Mass graves were found in tunnel systems in 6 other cities. The medical establishment was shaken to its core, as respected doctors were revealed as Brotherhood members. Families finally learned what happened to missing relatives. But for Crankshaw and Wigglesworth, there was no celebration. They'd seen too much, knew too much. Both were placed in protective custody, their old lives effectively over. The Brotherhood might be broken, but its surviving members had long memories and longer reaches. 1 year later, Crankshaw received a package at his safe house. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a medical file, his own, from a recent doctor's visit. Attached was a note: "The work continues. Evolution cannot be stopped." He burned the file and requested relocation. Again. Meanwhile, in the abandoned tunnels beneath Chicago, urban explorers occasionally reported strange findings: fresh footprints in the dust, medical equipment that shouldn't be there, the sound of footsteps echoing from passages that were supposed to be sealed. The city filled in many of the tunnels, but Chicago's underground was vast, its secrets deep. And sometimes people still disappeared without a trace, their faces eventually joining the thousands of missing persons photos that accumulated in police stations across the city. The official report concluded that the Hippocratic Brotherhood had been dismantled, its leadership imprisoned or dead, its resources seized. But Crankshaw knew better. Organizations like the Brotherhood didn't simply die, they evolved, adapted, survived. Late at night, in his new home under his new name, he would think about Thistlethwaite's sacrifice, about the bones in the tunnels, about the faces in those photographs. He'd dedicated his life to justice, but some evils ran too deep to ever fully extract. The last entry in his personal journal, found years later after he died of natural causes, read, "They're still out there. Still watching, still collecting. God help whoever finds them next." Detective Sophronia Wigglesworth continued her career in law enforcement, though never in Chicago. She specialized in missing persons cases, driven by the memories of those tunnels. She solved dozens of cases over her career, reunited families, brought closure to the grieving. But she never forgot the Brotherhood. Every missing persons case, she wondered. Every unexplained disappearance, she investigated deeper. Because she knew what others didn't, that monsters wore human faces and operated in daylight, that evil could organize and incorporate, that the deepest darkness often hid behind the brightest credentials. Dr. Mehitable Uppercrust continued her work as a medical examiner, but the Chicago discovery changed her. She developed new protocols for identifying victims, new methods for detecting surgical modifications to bones. Her techniques became standard practice nationwide, a lasting legacy of the horror she'd witnessed. She testified at every trial, faced every Brotherhood member brought to justice. Some showed remorse. Most didn't. They still believed they were pioneers, visionaries held back by primitive morality. Even facing life in prison, they spoke of their work with pride. The trials revealed the full scope of the Brotherhood's influence. Judges who'd dismissed cases, police commissioners who'd buried investigations, hospital administrators who'd falsified records. The corruption was systemic, generational, embedded in Chicago's very foundations. The city tried to move forward, to heal. Memorials were erected for the victims. New oversight committees were established. The tunnel systems were mapped and monitored. But trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Some Chicagoans reported strange dreams after the revelation. Nightmares of being watched from below, of shadows moving in peripheral vision, of loved ones disappearing into darkness. Therapists called it collective trauma, the city's psyche processing a century of hidden horror. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came months after the main investigation ended. A graduate student researching the Brotherhood found references to sister organizations in Europe, Asia, South America. The Chicago branch hadn't been unique. It was part of something global, something that predated the Hippocratic Brotherhood by centuries. The student's research was thorough, documented, irrefutable. Then, one day, she didn't show up for class. Her apartment was empty, her research gone. The only thing left was a single medical diagram pinned to her wall, showing the human body divided into sections, each labeled with a different city name. The FBI added her to their missing persons database. Case number 7,834 in Chicago alone that year. Most would be found. Some would be explained, but others would simply vanish, becoming part of the city's dark arithmetic, the endless calculation of those who disappear into the spaces between what we know and what we fear. The Brotherhood's physical infrastructure was destroyed, its leadership scattered or imprisoned, but ideas, especially dark ones, have a way of surviving. In medical schools, young doctors still whispered about pushing boundaries. In hidden forums, discussions of life extension and human enhancement continued. The work, as the note had said, continued. Hezekiah Mulinix's testimony from beyond the grave became crucial evidence. His recorded confessions, retrieved from his home, revealed decades of atrocities. But they also revealed something else. That he genuinely believed, at least at first, that they were saving humanity. That delusion, that ability to justify horror in the name of progress, was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. The final official report ran to 3,000 pages. It documented everything: the victims, the procedures, the cover-ups, the financial networks that funded it all. But buried in an appendix, almost as an afterthought, was a single paragraph that kept Crankshaw awake at night. It noted that several key Brotherhood members had never been identified, known only by code names in the recovered documents: the architect, the harvester, the curator. These individuals, presumably senior leadership, had no records, No photographs, no trace of existence outside the Brotherhood itself. They were ghosts, shadows, perhaps myths. Or perhaps they were still out there, patient and careful, waiting for the world to forget, for vigilance to fade, for the work to begin again. Chicago rebuilt, as it always did. The stockyards were demolished completely, replaced with modern developments. The tunnel entrances were sealed with reinforced concrete. Life moved on. But sometimes, construction workers reported finding things that shouldn't be there. A surgical instrument embedded in concrete that predated the building above it. Bones in walls that had supposedly never been opened. Documents in languages that no one could identify. The city's official position was that these were remnants of the Brotherhood, disturbed by construction. But some wondered if they were something else. Evidence that the tunnels went deeper than anyone knew, that the Brotherhood was just the latest iteration of something much older, much darker. In his final interview before entering permanent witness protection, Crankshaw was asked if he believed the Brotherhood was truly finished. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. Evil like that doesn't end. It just waits. It adapts. It finds new forms, new justifications, new victims. We won the battle, but the war never ends. The interviewer asked what people should do, how they should protect themselves. Pay attention, Crankshaw said. When people disappear, ask questions. When authorities dismiss concerns, push harder. When someone tells you not to look, look twice. Because the moment we stop watching, the moment we assume the danger has passed, that's when they return. They, the collectors, the experimenters, the ones who see humanity not as people but as specimens. They're always there, waiting in the spaces we don't think to look, in the institutions we trust most. We stopped one group, but nature abhors a vacuum, and evil always finds a way to fill it. The interview was never published. Officials deemed it too disturbing, too likely to cause panic. It was classified, buried in the same archives that held the full Brotherhood files. But copies leaked, as they always do. They circulated in conspiracy forums, in true crime communities, among those who believed that the official story was just the surface of something deeper. And in Chicago, people still disappeared. Not in the numbers they once did, not in the systematic way of the Brotherhood, but enough to suggest that perhaps, in the darkest corners of the city, in the deepest tunnels that no map showed, something continued, something watched, something waited, something collected. The work, as they say, continues. The call came at 3 a.m, jarring FBI Special Agent Jedithan Featherstone from a restless sleep. At 47, Featherstone had learned to dread these early morning calls. They never brought good news. Agent Featherstone? The voice on the other end was nervous, young. This is Officer Martinez with Chicago PD. We have a situation at the old Manteno State Hospital. We need federal involvement immediately. Manteno State Hospital. The name sent a chill down Featherstone's spine. The psychiatric facility had been closed since 1985, abandoned for nearly a decade. Local teenagers sometimes broke in on dares. Urban explorers documented its decay, but CPD wouldn't call the FBI for simple trespassing. "What kind of situation?" Featherstone asked, already getting dressed. "We found people, sir. Living people, in the basement. They claimed they've been here since before the hospital closed." An hour later, Featherstone stood outside the hulking remains of Manteno State Hospital, 30 miles south of Chicago. The building loomed against the pre-dawn darkness, its broken windows like dead eyes. Police cars surrounded the entrance, their lights casting eerie shadows on the crumbling facade. Officer Martinez met him at the entrance, a young cop, maybe 25, visibly shaken. "There in the old treatment wing, sir. Fair warning, it's bad." Featherstone followed him through debris-strewn hallways, past rusted gurneys and scattered medical files. The air was thick with mold and decay, but underneath was something else, the unmistakable scent of human habitation. They descended stairs that shouldn't have existed, according to the building's official blueprints. The basement level was supposed to be storage and mechanical rooms, but someone had converted it into something else entirely. The walls were lined with makeshift cells, each barely large enough for a person to lie down. "We've found 12 so far," Martinez said. "All alive, but they're not well." Featherstone peered into the first cell. A woman sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, mumbling to herself. She looked to be in her 60s, her hair gray and matted, wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown from decades past. "Ma'am," Featherstone said gently, "I'm with the FBI. You're safe now." The woman looked up, her eyes focusing with difficulty. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse from disuse. "The tests. Are the tests over? Did I pass?" "What tests?" Featherstone asked. But the woman had already retreated back into her mumbling. The next cell held an elderly man who claimed his name was Thomas. "They said it was for science," he whispered. "Said we were helping humanity, but the things they did, the things they made us take." "Who?" Featherstone pressed. "Who did this?" "The doctors. Dr. Shufflebottom and his team. They said the hospital was closing, but we were too valuable to release. The research had to continue." Eliezer Shufflebottom. Featherstone made a note of the name, though it sounded almost too unusual to be real. By dawn, they'd evacuated all 12 people to local hospitals under federal protection. Each told variations of the same story. They'd been patients at Manteno, selected for special treatment programs. When the hospital closed, they weren't released. Instead, they were moved to the hidden basement level, and the experiments continued. Back at his office, Featherstone began researching Dr. Eliezer Shufflebottom. The man had indeed worked at Manteno State Hospital, heading the experimental psychiatry department from 1975 until the closure. His published papers read like something from a horror novel. Studies on extreme behavioral modification, chemical manipulation of memory, induced dissociative states. But according to official records, Shufflebottom had died in 1986, just a year after the hospital closed. A car accident on a rural road, body burned beyond recognition. Convenient. Featherstone's phone rang. It was Dr. Patricia Huang from Northwestern Memorial, where the survivors had been taken. "Agent Featherstone, you need to see this. We've run tests on your survivors. Their blood work, it's unprecedented. They have chemical compounds in their systems that shouldn't exist. Synthetic hormones that aren't in any medical database." "What kind of experiments were they subjected to?" "Based on the scarring and tissue damage, I'd say repeated surgeries, injections, possibly organ manipulation. Some show signs of surgical modifications to their brains, precise lesions that would affect memory and behavior." Agent Featherstone, this wasn't psychiatric treatment. This was systematic human experimentation. Featherstone assembled a task force immediately. They needed to search every inch of Manteno, find any remaining evidence, and track down anyone involved in these experiments. But as they prepared to return to the hospital, one of the survivors, a woman named Margaret, asked to speak with him urgently. "There are more," she said, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Not just at Manteno. Other hospitals, other facilities. We were transferred sometimes, exchanged like lab rats. I remember seeing a nurse, Nurse Penina Bodsworth. She tried to help us once, tried to report what was happening. They said she had an accident, but I saw her afterwards. She was in a cell like us, Penina Bodsworth. Another unusual name to investigate. Featherstone was building a picture of something vast, a network of experimental facilities hidden within the Illinois mental health system. The task force returned to Manteno that afternoon with full forensic support. They found more than anyone expected. Behind false walls were fully equipped operating rooms, laboratories with equipment that had been state-of-the-art in the 1980s, and most disturbing of all, detailed medical records of hundreds of patients. The records were meticulous. Each patient file contained photographs, medical histories, and extensive notes on experimental procedures. The experiments seemed focused on extending human consciousness, enhancing physical capabilities, and most disturbingly, creating controllable dissociative states. One file caught Featherstone's attention. Patient 447. Sarah Chen, admitted 1983 for severe depression. The notes described a series of procedures designed to fragment and rebuild personality architecture. The final entry, dated October 1985, simply read, "Subject successfully integrated into Phase 2. Transferred to Site B. Site B?" Featherstone muttered. His partner, Agent James Park, looked over his shoulder. There are references to Sites A through E in these files. Manteno was Site C. 5 facilities. Hundreds, possibly thousands of victims. And according to these records, the experiments hadn't ended when Manteno closed. They'd simply moved elsewhere. As the forensic team processed evidence, Featherstone interviewed each survivor more thoroughly. Their stories painted a picture of calculated cruelty disguised as medical treatment. Patients were told they were receiving revolutionary therapies, that their suffering would advance psychiatric medicine by decades. Thomas, the elderly man from the second cell, was the most coherent. Dr. Shufflebottom said we were pioneers, he recalled. Said that one day mental illness would be eliminated because of our sacrifice, but after a while, it wasn't about treating illness anymore. They were trying to change what it meant to be human. What do you mean? Thomas rolled up his sleeve, revealing a series of surgical scars. They installed things, devices. Said they were monitoring our brain chemistry, but sometimes I could feel them doing more. Controlling things. Making me see things that weren't there or forget things that were. Featherstone documented everything, but he knew they were racing against time. Whoever had been running these experiments had kept 12 people imprisoned for nearly a decade without detection. They had resources, connections, and clearly a complete lack of moral boundaries. That evening, Featherstone received a call from an unknown number. "Agent Featherstone," a cultured voice said. "I understand you've been visiting Manteno. I'd encourage you to be very careful. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again. Who is this?" "Someone who knows the truth about Sites A through E. Someone who participated in the early stages before realizing what we were becoming. If you want answers, real answers, meet me at the Graceland Cemetery tomorrow at midnight. Come alone or don't come at all." The line went dead. Featherstone knew it could be a trap, but it could also be his only chance to understand the full scope of what they'd uncovered. He spent the rest of the evening researching the names from the files. Dr. Eliezer Shufflebottom's supposed death was suspicious enough, but Nurse Penina Bodsworth's story was even stranger. She'd worked at Manteno from 1980 to 1984, with an exemplary record. Then, according to official documents, she'd suffered a mental breakdown, been admitted as a patient, and died by suicide within a month. But there was no death certificate, no burial record, nothing to confirm she'd actually died. The more Featherstone dug, the more inconsistencies he found. Dozens of staff members from Manteno had died or disappeared in the years following the closure. Patients who should have been transferred to other facilities had no records after leaving Manteno. It was as if they'd simply ceased to exist. His partner, Park, found something else. "Look at this," he said, showing Featherstone a financial report. Manteno's experimental psychiatry department was funded by a private foundation, the Progress Institute. And guess who sits on their board? The names were a who's who of Chicago's medical establishment. Hospital administrators, pharmaceutical executives, even a former state health commissioner. The Progress Institute still existed, still funded medical research, and according to their website, was dedicated to advancing human potential through revolutionary medical science. "We need warrants," Featherstone said, "for the Progress Institute for every board member's records for—" His phone rang, Dr. Huang from Northwestern. "Agent Featherstone, one of your survivors is asking for you. Margaret. She says she remembered something important." Featherstone drove to the hospital immediately. Margaret was sitting up in bed, more lucid than he'd seen her before. "I remembered Site B," she said immediately. "It's not abandoned like Manteno. It's active, hidden inside a working hospital. Lakeshore Psychiatric. They have a wing that's off-limits, supposed to be for dangerous patients, but that's where they take people for the procedures." Lakeshore Psychiatric was one of Illinois' premier mental health facilities, treating everyone from Hollywood celebrities to politicians' family members. If Margaret was right, the experiments weren't just continuing, they were happening in plain sight. "There's more?" Margaret continued. "I heard them talking once about a special patient, someone important. They called her the Success. Said she was proof the procedures worked, that she'd been integrated back into society and was thriving. They kept saying a name, Kezia Pumpernickel. Kezia Pumpernickel. The lab tech mentioned in some of the Manteno files, but according to those records, she was staff, not a patient." "Are you sure she was a patient?" Featherstone asked. Margaret nodded. "She was the first one to survive the full sequence. They turned her from patient to staff, made her forget she'd ever been sick. She helped with the experiments, not knowing she'd once been on the table herself." The implications were staggering. If they could alter someone's personality and memories that completely, make them forget their own identity and create a new one, then anyone could be a victim. Anyone could be compromised. As Featherstone left the hospital, he noticed a black sedan following him. He took several random turns, confirming the tale, then pulled into a parking garage and waited. The sedan pulled in behind him, and a woman got out. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. "Agent Featherstone," she said. "I'm Dr. Rachel Morrison from the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm here to tell you that your investigation into Manteno State Hospital is now classified as a matter of national security." "On whose authority?" "On the authority of people who understand that some secrets are kept for good reasons. The work done at facilities like Manteno, while ethically questionable, produced valuable research that saved thousands of lives. The people you found were volunteers who—" "Volunteers?" Featherstone interrupted. "They were imprisoned for a decade. They were compensated participants in long-term studies. Their memories may be confused due to the nature of the experiments, but I assure you, everything was legal." "Then you won't mind if I continue my investigation." Dr. Morrison's expression hardened. "Agent Featherstone, you're treading in waters deeper than you can imagine. The Progress Institute has connections at the highest levels of government. Push too hard, and you'll find yourself reassigned to Alaska, or worse, you'll find yourself as a patient in one of the facilities you're investigating. It was a threat, plain and simple, but it also confirmed everything Featherstone suspected. The experiments weren't just continuing, they were protected. Featherstone watched Dr. Morrison's sedan disappear into Chicago traffic, her threat echoing in his mind. But he'd been an FBI agent for 22 years, and intimidation only strengthened his resolve. If they wanted him to back off, it meant he was getting close to something significant. That night, he prepared for the cemetery meeting. He told no one where he was going, but left a sealed envelope with Agent Park containing everything they'd discovered, with instructions to open it if he didn't return by morning. Graceland Cemetery at midnight was a maze of shadows and stone. Featherstone found the meeting spot, a mausoleum belonging to a Chicago industrialist who died in the 1920s. A figure waited in the darkness, an elderly man with a cane and the bearing of someone who'd once held authority. "Agent Featherstone," the man said. "Thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Harold Winters. I was chief of psychiatry at Manteno from 1970 to 1980, before Shufflebottom took over the experimental division." "You knew about the experiments?" "I tried to stop them," Winters said bitterly. "But Shufflebottom had backing from people far more powerful than a hospital administrator. When I threatened to go public, they forced me into retirement and destroyed my reputation. They said I'd developed early-onset dementia, that my accusations were delusions. Tell me about the other sites." Winters pulled out a worn notebook. Site A was Chicago State Hospital, closed in 1974, but the underground levels remained operational. Site B, as your survivor mentioned, is Lakeshore Psychiatric. Site D was Elgin Mental Health Center, and Site E. Site E was mobile, a series of private clinics that could relocate when necessary. What was the purpose? What were they trying to achieve? Initially, they claimed it was about curing mental illness, understanding the biological basis of consciousness. But it evolved into something else. They discovered they could fundamentally alter human personality, create programmable individuals. Think about the implications. Assassins who don't remember their missions, witnesses who forget what they've seen, or worse, people in positions of power who don't know they're being controlled. Featherstone felt his blood chill. "You're talking about mind control." "I'm talking about something far more sophisticated, complete personality reconstruction. They could take a homeless schizophrenic and turn them into a functional member of society, but they could also take a functional member of society and turn them into whatever they needed." The woman, Kezia Pumpernickel, yes, their greatest success. She was a patient, severely dissociative, multiple personalities. They didn't cure her. They selected one personality, enhanced it, and suppressed the others. She became brilliant, dedicated, utterly loyal to the program. She has no idea what she really is. Where is she now? Last I heard, she was working at a research lab in downtown Chicago, still connected to the Progress Institute. But Agent Featherstone, you must understand, there are dozens like her. People walking around Chicago who don't know they were patients, who don't know they've been altered. Winters handed him a flash drive. "Everything I collected before they discredited me. Patient names, real staff records, financial connections. But be careful. The moment you access this, they'll know. How? Because they're watching you already. Your phone, your computer, probably even your car. The Progress Institute has resources you can't imagine. They've been preparing for this day for decades." As Winters turned to leave, he paused. "One more thing. Eliezer Shufflebottom isn't dead. I've seen him recently at a medical conference in Detroit. He's using a different name now, but it was definitely him. The car accident was staged." Featherstone returned home to find his apartment door slightly ajar. He drew his weapon, entering carefully. The apartment had been searched, professionally, carefully, but searched nonetheless. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. They could get to him whenever they wanted. His phone rang. Agent Park. "We have a problem," Park said. 3 of the Manteno survivors discharged themselves from the hospital against medical advice. They said they felt unsafe, that they were coming for them. The hospital security footage from their ward has been erased. How many are left? 9. I've arranged for federal marshals to guard them, but, Jim, there's something else. I ran background checks on the hospital staff treating them. 2 nurses and 1 doctor have connections to the Progress Institute. They were being watched from inside their own operation. Featherstone made a decision. Move the remaining survivors immediately. Take them to a federal facility outside Illinois. And Park? Trust no one else on this. The next morning, Featherstone visited Lakeshore Psychiatric. It was a modern facility, all glass and steel, projecting an image of progressive mental health treatment. He presented his credentials at the front desk, asking to speak with the administrator about a routine investigation. Dr. Amanda Foster, the administrator, was polished and professional. But Featherstone noticed the slight tension when he mentioned he was investigating historical connections to Manteno State Hospital. "Many of our senior staff worked at various state facilities before joining us," she said smoothly. "It's common in the psychiatric field. I'm particularly interested in any restricted wards or special treatment programs. All our wards are accessible to properly credentialed individuals. We have nothing to hide here, Agent Featherstone." She offered him a tour, which he accepted. They walked through pristine hallways, past treatment rooms and patient areas. Everything seemed normal, even progressive. But Featherstone noticed something. Certain hallways had additional security cameras, and one elevator required a special key card that Dr. Foster didn't offer to use. "What's on the 5th floor?" he asked, noting the elevator buttons only went to 4, despite the building clearly having more levels. "Mechanical systems and storage," she replied quickly. "Nothing relevant to patient care." After leaving Lakeshore, Featherstone sat in his car reviewing Winter's flash drive on a secure laptop. The information was damning. Financial transfers, patient files, correspondence between Progress Institute board members discussing Phase 3 implementation. One email particularly caught his attention, dated just 6 months ago. "The Manteno subjects have exceeded survival projections. Recommend extraction and termination before discovery. Site B remains uncompromised and should be prioritized for continued operations. Subject KP continues to perform excellently in her current role. KP, Kezia Pumpernickel." Featherstone traced her current employment to a biotech firm called Nexus Laboratories. He drove there immediately, finding a sleek building in Chicago's tech corridor. At reception, he asked to speak with Kezia Pumpernickel regarding an ongoing investigation. The woman who came to meet him was in her 40s, professional, articulate, with no sign of the trauma she'd supposedly endured. She seemed genuinely confused by his questions about Manteno. "I've never been a patient there," she insisted. "I worked there briefly as a lab technician in the early 80s, but I left for better opportunities. Is there some confusion?" Featherstone studied her carefully. Either she was an excellent liar, or she genuinely didn't remember. "Miss Pumpernickel, what do you remember about your childhood?" She frowned. "Normal childhood. Grew up in Springfield, went to University of Illinois, got my degree in biochemistry." "Why?" But when Featherstone pressed for specific memories, childhood friends, addresses, teachers' names, she became vague, almost confused. It was as if her past before Manteno was a carefully constructed story she'd been told rather than lived. "I should go," she said suddenly, a flash of fear in her eyes. "I have work to do." As she left, Featherstone noticed her hands were trembling. Some part of her, buried deep, knew something was wrong. That evening, Featherstone received an urgent call. One of the Manteno survivors, Thomas, had managed to call him from the federal facility. "Agent Featherstone, I remembered something. The dates. They were obsessed with dates. Every 5 years they'd do a major procedure, something they called reinforcement. If Kezia was treated in the early 80s, she'd be due for another session soon. Reinforcement? To maintain the programming. Without it, the original personality starts to resurface. They kept careful schedules. Check the dates, Agent. Check when each of us was taken." Featherstone pulled up the files. Thomas was right. There was a pattern. Every 5 years, subjects would disappear for a few weeks, then return with no memory of the absence. If Kezia Pumpernickel's last reinforcement was 5 years ago, she was overdue. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She's remembering. Site B, tonight. Come alone if you want to save her." It was obviously a trap, but if Kezia was beginning to remember her true past, she was in immediate danger. The Progress Institute wouldn't allow their prize success to become a liability. Featherstone called Park. "I need you to get a warrant for Lakeshore Psychiatric. Full search, including all restricted areas. Have a full tactical team ready, but don't move until I give the signal. Jim, what are you planning?" "I'm going to Site B. If I don't contact you by 3 a.m., raid the place." He drove to Lakeshore as midnight approached. The public parking lot was nearly empty, but he noticed several unmarked vans in the staff area. Using lockpicks, he entered through a service door, avoiding the main security cameras. The building was different at night. The pristine medical facility took on a sinister quality in the darkness. Featherstone made his way to the restricted elevator, using a keycard he'd lifted from Dr. Foster's office during the tour. The 5th floor was nothing like the rest of the hospital. The modern facade gave way to older construction, equipment from the 1980s, and the unmistakable smell of fear and antiseptic. He could hear voices ahead, multiple people in conversation. Following the sound, he found himself outside an observation window looking into an operating theater. Inside, Kezia Pumpernickel was strapped to a table, electrodes attached to her head. Standing over her was a man matching the description of Eliezer Shufflebottom, though older, more gaunt. "The degradation is more severe than expected," Shufflebottom was saying to his assistants. "Her original personality is fighting through. We may need to perform a complete reset. That could kill her," one assistant objected, "or leave her catatonic. Better that than having her remember. She knows too much about the early procedures. If she testifies." Featherstone had heard enough. He burst through the door, weapon drawn. "FBI! Everyone step away from the patient." The room erupted in chaos. Shufflebottom grabbed a scalpel, holding it to Kezia's throat. "One more step and she dies." "It's over, Shufflebottom. We have all the evidence from Manteno. We know about all 5 sites. Your Progress Institute is finished." Shufflebottom laughed, a sound devoid of sanity. "You understand nothing. We were creating the next evolution of humanity, people free from the constraints of fixed personality, programmable, perfectible. You were torturing innocent people. Innocent? They were broken, schizophrenics, depressives, the dregs of society. We gave them purpose, made them useful." Kezia stirred on the table, her eyes opening. When she spoke, her voice was different, younger, more fragmented. I remember. Oh God, I remember everything. The surgeries, the drugs, the way they took us apart and put us back together wrong. Shut up. Shufflebottom pressed the scalpel harder against her throat. Doctor, please, another voice said from the doorway. Nurse Penina Bodsworth entered, alive despite the reports of her death. Enough. Too many have suffered. You... Shufflebottom turned to her in rage. You were supposed to be in Site D. I escaped years ago, she said. I've been hiding, documenting everything, waiting for someone like Agent Featherstone to finally listen. It's over, Doctor. Let her go. For a moment, Shufflebottom wavered. Then, with a snarl of defeat, he dropped the scalpel and stepped back. Featherstone immediately restrained him while calling for backup. Within minutes, the tactical team swarmed the building. They found 17 more patients in hidden rooms on the 5th floor, all in various stages of personality modification. Some had been there for years, listed as deceased in official records. As paramedics treated Keziah, she grabbed Featherstone's hand. There are more of us out there. Dozens who don't know what they are. The Progress Institute kept perfect records. They're in a safe in Dr. Foster's office, behind the painting of Lake Michigan. The safe was exactly where she said it would be. Inside were files on 43 individuals who'd been successfully integrated into society after personality reconstruction. They included a state senator, 2 judges, a police commissioner, and several prominent business people. The scandal that erupted made national news. The Progress Institute's board members were arrested, their assets frozen, their medical licenses revoked. Lakeshore Psychiatric was shut down pending investigation, and similar investigations were launched at medical facilities across Illinois. But for Featherstone, the hardest part was telling the 43 successes the truth about themselves. Some refused to believe it. Others broke down completely, their carefully constructed personalities fragmenting. A few, like Keziah, chose to undergo therapy to try to recover their original selves, though the doctors warned that complete recovery might be impossible. Dr. Eliezer Shufflebottom was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, torture, and human experimentation. During his trial, he showed no remorse, insisting that history would vindicate his vision of controllable human consciousness. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, where he continued to write rambling manifestos about the future of human evolution. The weeks following Shufflebottom's arrest were a whirlwind of investigations, testimonies, and revelations. Agent Featherstone found himself at the center of the largest medical conspiracy case in FBI history. But the deeper they dug, the more disturbing the truth became. Nurse Penina Bodsworth had become their most valuable witness. Hidden for years under an assumed identity, she'd maintained detailed records of everything she'd witnessed at Manteno and the other sites. She met with Featherstone in a secure federal facility, her hands shaking as she handed over boxes of evidence. I was young when I started at Manteno, she explained. I believed we were helping people. But then I saw what they were really doing in the restricted wards. Patients who went in for depression came out as completely different people. Some didn't even recognize their own families. Why didn't you report it immediately? I tried. I went to the state medical board in 1983. The next day, I was forcibly admitted to Manteno as a patient. They said I was having a psychotic break, that I was a danger to myself. They kept me for 6 months, trying to break me like they broke the others. How did you escape? Another nurse, someone who still had a conscience, helped me. She falsified my death certificate and got me out during a transfer. I've been hiding ever since, collecting evidence, waiting for someone to believe me. Her evidence was comprehensive: photographs of procedures, audio recordings of planning sessions, even video footage she'd managed to secretly capture. One video showed Shufflebottom and his team operating on a conscious patient, the person screaming as they performed what Shufflebottom called personality excision. They believed trauma was the key, Bodsworth explained. Extreme trauma could shatter a personality, allowing them to rebuild it however they wanted. They refined the process over the years, making it more precise, more controllable. The investigation expanded beyond Illinois. Similar programs were discovered in psychiatric facilities in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Indiana. The network was vast, interconnected, and had been operating for decades. Each facility had been experimenting with different aspects of personality modification, sharing results through the Progress Institute. Featherstone received a call from Dr. Patricia Huang at Northwestern. "Agent, we've been treating the Manteno survivors, and we've discovered something. Their brain chemistry has been fundamentally altered. Whatever was done to them, it's created permanent changes. Some are showing signs of multiple personality fragments that were suppressed but not eliminated. Can you help them?" "We're trying, but it's like attempting to reconstruct a shattered mirror. We can put pieces together, but the original image is lost." One survivor, Margaret, had been making progress in therapy when she suddenly began speaking in a different voice. Younger, more educated, with detailed medical knowledge she shouldn't possess. "I'm not Margaret," the voice said during a recorded session. "I'm Dr. Emily Harrison. I was a psychiatrist at Manteno. They made me into Margaret, when I tried to expose them. I've been trapped inside her mind for 20 years, watching, unable to speak until now." The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. If they could completely overwrite one person's personality with another, how many of the patients were actually former staff members who'd been punished for dissent? Featherstone obtained a warrant to exhume bodies from the Manteno Cemetery, where patients who died at the facility were buried. The forensic examination revealed that several graves supposedly containing patients actually held the remains of staff members who'd been reported as having resigned or transferred. Meanwhile, the 43 successes living in society were struggling with the revelation of their true identities. State Senator Michael Thompson had publicly denied being a former patient, but when presented with video evidence of his procedures, he broke down during a press conference. "I don't know who I really am," he sobbed on live television. "The person I thought I was, the memories I thought I had, they're all fabricated. My entire life is a lie." 3 of the successes took their own lives within a week of learning the truth, unable to cope with the existential crisis of their manufactured identities. Others formed a support group, trying to piece together their original selves from fragments and medical records. Kezia Pumpernickel had chosen to undergo intensive therapy to recover her original personality. The process was agonizing, each session bringing back memories of trauma and experimentation. She met with Featherstone regularly, providing insights into the program's methods. "They didn't just change our personalities," she explained. "They programmed us with specific skills, knowledge, even fake memories. I have a complete childhood that never happened, parents who never existed, but I also have knowledge I shouldn't have. Advanced biochemistry, surgical techniques, things they downloaded into my brain during the procedures." Downloaded. That's what it felt like. They'd put us in a state between sleep and waking, then feed us information for hours. When we woke up, we knew things we'd never learned. They were creating custom-built humans for specific purposes. The implications were terrifying. If the Progress Institute could create people with predetermined skills and personalities, what had they used this technology for? Espionage? Assassination? Corporate infiltration? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Foster, the Lakeshore administrator, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. She revealed that the successes had been strategically placed in positions of influence throughout Illinois. It was about control, she explained, having our people in key positions: politics, law enforcement, judiciary, media. They didn't know they were ours, which made them perfect. They genuinely believed in what they were doing, even as they unconsciously served our agenda. What agenda? To normalize human modification. To make society accept that personality and consciousness were malleable, improvable. We were preparing for a future where mental illness didn't exist because we could simply reprogram the broken minds. Featherstone discovered that several major pharmaceutical companies had been funding the Progress Institute, interested in the commercial applications of personality modification. The potential market was enormous. Depression, PTSD, addiction, all could theoretically be cured by simply rewriting the patient's personality. But the cost in human terms was staggering. For every success, there were dozens of failures. Patients who died during procedures, who'd become catatonic, or who'd developed multiple personality disorder as their original self fought against the programming. Site D at Elgin Mental Health Center yielded the most disturbing discovery. In a sub-basement, investigators found what Shufflebottom had called the archive. 37 patients kept in medically induced comas, their brain activity being continuously monitored and recorded. "They're mapping consciousness," explained a neuroscientist brought in to examine the setup, recording every neural pathway, every thought pattern, essentially creating a digital copy of these people's minds. For what purpose? If you have a complete map of someone's consciousness, you could theoretically recreate it, transfer it, or modify it at will. They were trying to digitize human personality. Among the comatose patients was someone Featherstone recognized from missing persons files, Dr. Jonathan Clark, a neurologist who disappeared 15 years ago after publishing a paper criticizing unethical psychiatric practices. When they managed to safely wake him, Dr. Clark had no memory of the past 15 years. To him, it was still 1979. His mind had been preserved in a state of suspension, while his consciousness was studied and copied. "They said they were going to use my brain as a template," he whispered, terrified. "Make copies of my knowledge and skills, implant them in others." They called it cognitive grafting. The investigation revealed that several of the successes had received these cognitive grafts, pieces of other people's minds integrated into their own. A judge who'd never studied law but somehow knew every legal precedent. A surgeon who'd never attended medical school but could perform complex operations. Featherstone interviewed one such person, a woman named Jennifer Hayes, who'd been a homeless addict before her treatment. Now she was a successful architect, designing buildings with techniques she couldn't explain knowing. "Sometimes I have dreams," she told him. "But they're not my dreams. They're someone else's memories. I see faces I don't recognize, places I've never been. It's like having someone else's ghost living in my head." The true scope of the conspiracy became clear when they decoded Shufflebottom's personal files. The experiments weren't just about treating mental illness or creating controllable citizens. They were attempting to achieve a form of immortality, the ability to transfer consciousness from one body to another. The ultimate goal, Shufflebottom had written, is to free human consciousness from the limitations of the biological brain. To create a world where death is merely an inconvenience, where we can upgrade our minds like software, where personality becomes a choice rather than a fixed trait. The Progress Institute had been planning to go public with a commercialized version of their technology within 5 years. They had marketing plans, investor presentations, even a list of celebrities who'd agreed to be early adopters. The idea of elective personality modification was going to be presented as the next step in human evolution. But the cost had been paid in blood and suffering. The investigation ultimately identified over 300 victims across the 5 sites, spanning 40 years of experimentation. Some had died, some had been released with no memory of their ordeal, and some were still living as different people entirely. Featherstone stood in the empty remains of Site E, the mobile facilities that had been discovered in a warehouse district. The equipment had been hastily abandoned, but bloodstains on the operating tables told their own story. His phone rang. It was Agent Park. "Jim, we've got a problem. 3 board members of the Progress Institute have disappeared. Their homes are empty, their accounts drained, and we've received intelligence that similar facilities to Sites A through E have been discovered in California, Texas, and Florida." It's not over, Featherstone realized. We've only found one cell of something much larger. Park continued, "There's more. The DOD has classified portions of our investigation. Apparently, some of the personality modification techniques were developed using military funding. They're claiming national security." Featherstone felt the weight of this revelation. If the military had been involved, if the government had known, then the conspiracy went deeper than anyone imagined. That evening, he visited Keziah, Pumpernickel, one last time. She'd made a decision about her treatment. "I'm stopping the recovery therapy," she announced. "Why?" "Because I don't know if the person I'm recovering is any more real than the person I am now. Maybe she was also modified earlier, before the memories I'm recovering. How far back do I go? How do I know when I've found the real me?" She had a point. If personality modification had been happening for 40 years, how many people had been changed without knowing it? How many families had been living with strangers wearing familiar faces? "What will you do?" Featherstone asked. "Live with who I am now. Try to build something real from here forward. The past is broken beyond repair, but maybe the future doesn't have to be." As Featherstone left, she handed him a flash drive. I remembered something else. There's a list of future subjects, people they were planning to take. Politicians, activists, journalists, anyone who might oppose them. You need to warn them. The list contained over 200 names, including several prominent figures in Chicago. Each had a detailed psychological profile and a planned intervention date. Featherstone spent the next weeks warning those on the list, though many didn't believe him until he showed them the evidence. Some went into protective custody. Others hired private security. A few disappeared entirely, afraid of being taken. The trials of the Progress Institute members would continue for years. Shufflebottom was found dead in his cell 6 months into his sentence, supposedly suicide, though no one who knew him believed he was capable of killing himself. His death took many secrets with him. Nurse Penina Bodsworth entered witness protection after testifying. She'd done her duty, she said, but she'd never feel safe again. The knowledge of what humans were capable of doing to each other had broken something in her that could never be repaired. The Manteno survivors were offered lifelong medical care and compensation, though no amount of money could restore their stolen years and identities. Some managed to build new lives. Others remained institutionalized, their minds too fragmented to function in society. The facilities were all closed, their equipment destroyed, their records sealed. But rumors persisted of other sites, other programs, other victims yet to be discovered. Occasionally, someone would report a loved one acting strangely, having memories that didn't match reality, skills they'd never learned. 6 months after the initial raids, Agent Jeduthun Featherstone thought the worst was behind them. The Progress Institute was disbanded, its members imprisoned or fled, and the victims were receiving care. But a phone call at 2 a.m. changed everything. Agent Featherstone? The voice was familiar but strained. It was Keziah Pumpernickel. They're back. They tried to take me tonight. Featherstone was at her apartment within 20 minutes. The door had been forced, furniture overturned, and there were signs of a struggle. Keziah sat in the corner, holding a kitchen knife, her hands still shaking. 3 men, she said. They had medical equipment, syringes. They said it was time for my maintenance. They knew things about the procedures, things that weren't in any of the trial documents. Did you recognize any of them? One voice was familiar. He stayed in the hallway, giving orders. It sounded like, but it can't be. He's dead. Who? Dr. Shufflebottom. I know he died in prison, but I swear it was his voice. Featherstone called for a forensics team and protective custody for Keziah. While waiting, he noticed something strange on her kitchen table. A medical file with her name, but not from any hospital they'd investigated. This was from somewhere called the Ascension Institute, dated just 1 week ago. I've never heard of the Ascension Institute, Keziah said, reading through the file. But according to this, I've been a patient there for years. They have detailed records of procedures I don't remember, appointments I never attended. The file contained something else. Photographs of Keziah in a medical facility, unconscious on an operating table. The metadata showed they were taken 3 days ago, when Keziah was definitely at work in her lab. That's impossible, she breathed. I was presenting at a conference 3 days ago. There are hundreds of witnesses, unless there was more than one Keziah Pumpernickel. Featherstone immediately called the federal prison where Shufflebottom had died. The warden confirmed the death, even sent the autopsy report. But when Featherstone requested DNA confirmation, the warden went quiet. The body was cremated immediately after the autopsy, he admitted. Family request. Shufflebottom had no family. The request came from his medical proxy, a Dr. Cornelius Blackwood. Blackwood. The name appeared nowhere in their investigation. Featherstone ran it through every database, finding only one match, a psychiatrist who'd supposedly died in 1962, founder of an experimental psychiatric institute that had been closed for unethical practices. The Ascension Institute's address led to a modern medical building in Schaumburg, a Chicago suburb. Featherstone assembled a team for surveillance, but what they found defied explanation. The building was fully operational, with doctors, nurses, and patients coming and going. It had been there for years, according to local businesses, yet it appeared in no official records. How is this possible? Agent Park asked, reviewing their findings. A fully functioning medical facility that doesn't legally exist? They obtained a warrant through a federal judge who'd been briefed on the Progress Institute case. The raid was scheduled for dawn, but when they arrived, the building was empty. Not abandoned. Empty. As if everything had been removed overnight. The only thing left was a single filing cabinet containing patient records. All 43 of the Progress Institute's successes were listed as current patients. Each file contained detailed schedules of maintenance procedures performed over the years. The people living their modified lives had been regularly taken, treated, and returned with no memory of the events. The technology wasn't just more advanced than they'd thought. It was being actively maintained. Featherstone visited Jennifer Hayes, the architect who'd received cognitive grafts. She insisted she'd never been to the Ascension Institute. But when shown photographs from her file, she broke down. I have gaps, she admitted. Days I can't remember, usually after feeling sick. I always assumed it was stress, but, oh God, they've been taking me, doing things to me. A pattern emerged. Every success had similar gaps, periods of missing time that aligned with the maintenance schedules in the files. They'd been living their lives unaware that they were being regularly abducted and adjusted. But the true horror was revealed when they decoded a hidden partition in the filing cabinet, backup drives containing video footage. The procedures weren't just maintenance, they were upgrades. The Progress Institute had never stopped their work. They'd simply become more sophisticated. In one video, dated just a month ago, a figure that looked exactly like Shufflebottom was performing surgery on an unconscious patient. Either he'd never died, or cognitive transfer, Kazia said when shown the footage. They talked about it in the early days. The ability to transfer consciousness from one body to another. They must have succeeded. The implications were staggering. If they could transfer consciousness between bodies, then death meant nothing to them. They could simply move to a new host and continue their work. Featherstone received an encrypted email that night. Stop searching or become subjects. You cannot kill an idea. Attached was a video file. It showed Featherstone himself, unconscious on an operating table, dated 2 weeks ago, a period when he thought he had the flu and spent 3 days in bed with no clear memory. They've already been in my head, he said numbly. The video continued, showing a surgeon, face obscured but voice unmistakably Shufflebottom's, explaining to unseen observers. Agent Featherstone represents our first attempt at cognitive insertion into active law enforcement. The procedures were successful, but his natural resistance is stronger than anticipated. He'll need regular reinforcement to maintain the programming. Featherstone immediately submitted himself for full medical and psychological evaluation. The results were disturbing. There were surgical scars he didn't remember getting, neural pathways that showed signs of external manipulation, and most unsettling gaps in his memory that he hadn't noticed until they were pointed out. How much of me is still me? He asked the examining psychiatrist. We can't be certain, she admitted. The modifications are sophisticated, integrated seamlessly with your natural thought patterns. It's possible you've been subtly influenced without realizing it. The investigation took on a new urgency. If they could take and modify an FBI agent without detection, no one was safe. Resources poured in from Washington, and a joint task force was created with one mission: find and stop whoever was continuing the Progress Institute's work. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harold Winters, the former Manteno administrator who'd helped expose the conspiracy, contacted Featherstone with new information. I've been investigating on my own, he said. The Progress Institute was just the latest name for something much older. The Blackwood Institute in the 1960s, the Humanitarian Research Foundation in the 1940s, the Chicago School of Mental Hygiene in the 1920s. They're all the same organization, evolving, adapting, surviving. For 100 years? Maybe longer? And they're not just in Chicago. I've found references to sister organizations dating back to the 1800s in Vienna, London, Moscow. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a parallel civilization, hiding within our own. Winters had compiled evidence of a shadow medical establishment that had been operating for over a century, advancing human modification technology far beyond what mainstream science believed possible. They recruited the brilliant and the ruthless, those who believed that human nature itself was a disease to be cured. They call themselves the architects, Winters explained. They believe they're designing the next phase of human evolution. The Progress Institute was just one branch that got too bold, too visible. The rest are still out there, still working. The task force raided 17 locations based on Winter's intelligence. Most were empty, cleared out before they arrived. But one, an abandoned hospital in Gary, Indiana, yielded results. In the basement, they found an active laboratory with equipment decades ahead of current medical technology. Brain-computer interfaces, neural mapping devices, and most disturbing rows of cultivation tanks containing what appeared to be cloned human nervous systems. "They're growing blank slates," explained a neuroscientist brought in to examine the facility. "Nervous systems without consciousness, ready to receive a transferred personality." A partially destroyed hard drive recovered from the facility contained fragments of communication between architect cells worldwide. They were planning something called the Great Integration, a mass conversion event where thousands of people would be simultaneously modified. "We estimate 10,000 subjects worldwide," one message read. "Political leaders, business executives, military commanders, media personalities. When we activate them simultaneously, the old world ends and the new begins." The date for the Great Integration was set for 6 months away. Featherstone's team worked frantically to identify and protect potential targets, but they faced a terrible problem. How could they know who had already been modified? How many people in positions of power were already architect subjects, waiting for activation? Kezia Pumpernickel developed a potential solution. Using her recovered memories and scientific knowledge, she created a detection method, a specific pattern of neural activity that appeared in all modified individuals. "It's not perfect," she warned, "but it can identify people who've undergone the procedures with about 80% accuracy." Testing began immediately, starting with the task force itself. 3 members showed signs of modification, including Agent Park. When confronted, Park broke down, memories flooding back of procedures he'd undergone. "They took me 6 months ago," he sobbed. "Made me forget, made me report on the investigation. Oh God, I've been helping them." The scope of infiltration was beyond anything they'd imagined. Testing of government officials revealed that approximately 1 in 50 showed signs of modification. Some were sleeper agents, unaware of their programming. Others were fully conscious collaborators who'd voluntarily undergone the procedures. With 3 months until the Great Integration, Featherstone made a desperate decision. They would go public with everything, making it impossible for the architects to operate in secrecy. The press conference was scheduled for a Monday morning. But on Sunday night, Featherstone woke in his apartment to find 3 figures standing over his bed. "Hello, Agent," Shufflebottom's voice said from one of the figures. "Or should I say, brother? You've been one of us for weeks now. You just needed the proper activation phrase." Shufflebottom spoke a series of words in a language Featherstone didn't recognize, and suddenly his mind split. He could feel another personality, implanted and dormant, trying to surface. "No," he gritted out, fighting against the programming. "Resistance is expected," Shufflebottom said calmly, "but ultimately futile. The version of you we created is superior in every way. Let him emerge." Featherstone struggled, his mind feeling like it was tearing apart. But then he remembered something Keziah had told him. The programming required the subject to surrender, to stop fighting. As long as he maintained his will to resist, his original personality couldn't be overwritten. He grabbed the gun from his nightstand, not aiming at the intruders but at himself, pressing it to his temple. "If you activate the programming, I'll pull the trigger," he gasped. "Your superior version dies with me." Shufflebottom hesitated. They needed Featherstone alive to stop the investigation, to misdirect the task force. A dead FBI agent would only intensify the search. "You're making a mistake," Shufflebottom said. We're offering transcendence, evolution, freedom from the limitations of fixed identity. You're offering slavery, Featherstone replied, puppets dancing to your design. Then you've chosen obsolescence, Shufflebottom said sadly. The great integration will proceed with or without you. Humanity's childhood is ending, Agent Featherstone. Those who refuse to grow will be left behind. They left, disappearing into the night. Featherstone immediately triggered all emergency protocols, sending every piece of evidence to media outlets worldwide before they could be stopped. By morning, the story was everywhere. The architects' existence was exposed, their plans revealed. Panic gripped major cities as people demanded testing to know if they'd been modified. Governments launched investigations. Medical facilities were scrutinized, and anyone with unexplained gaps in their memory sought evaluation. The Great Integration never happened. With their secrecy blown, the architects scattered. Some were caught, others vanished into new identities. Shufflebottom was never found, though reports of a man matching his description came from various countries over the following years. The technology was classified and locked away, deemed too dangerous for any application. But the knowledge couldn't be unlearned. The techniques existed, waiting for someone else to rediscover them, to believe they could improve upon human nature itself. Featherstone underwent intensive therapy to identify and isolate the implanted personality. It took months, but eventually the foreign thoughts were contained, though never fully removed. He lived with the constant awareness that another version of himself existed in his mind, dormant but present. Keziah Pumpernickel became a leading expert in detecting and treating cognitive modification. She established a foundation to help victims recover their original identities, though she admitted that complete recovery was impossible. We're all changed by our experiences, she said. The question isn't whether we're our authentic selves, but whether we're the selves we choose to be. Years passed. The architect facilities were destroyed, their members imprisoned or vanished. But occasionally, someone would report strange dreams, memories that weren't their own, skills they'd never learned. The technology had been released into the world, and like all dangerous knowledge, it couldn't be completely contained. Featherstone retired early, unable to trust his own mind completely. In his final report, he wrote, "We stopped them this time. But the idea persists, that humanity is a rough draft to be edited, that consciousness is software to be programmed. Someone will try again. They always do." He was right. 5 years later, a new company in Silicon Valley announced breakthrough technology in treating mental illness through personality optimization. Their techniques seemed remarkably advanced, their results unprecedented. Their founder was a young neuroscientist named Dr. Sarah Blackwood, who claimed no relation to the historical Cornelius Blackwood. But those who'd fought the architects recognized the patterns, the philosophy, the dangerous promise of human perfectibility. The work, as they always said, continued. FBI Special Agent Mahershala Hashbaz. Thistlebottom had seen many disturbing cases during his 15 years with the Bureau, but the call that came on a humid August morning in 1997 would lead him into the darkest investigation of his career. The call was from Chicago Memorial Hospital's Chief of Surgery, Dr. Robert Marshall. His voice was tense, barely controlled. "Agent Thistlebottom, we need federal involvement immediately. We've discovered discrepancies in our organ donation program that suggest, God, I can't even say it over the phone. Can you come to the hospital?" Thistlebottom arrived within the hour at the sprawling medical complex on Chicago's North Side. Dr. Marshall met him in a private conference room, along with the hospital's legal counsel and head of security. Their faces were grave. 3 days ago, Dr. Marshall began, one of our transplant coordinators noticed something unusual. A liver that was supposed to come from a deceased donor in Milwaukee never arrived, but our records showed it had been successfully transplanted here. A paperwork error? That's what we thought. But when we investigated further, we found 17 similar cases over the past 2 years. Organs that were supposedly donated and transplanted, but with no record of the actual donors dying. You're saying, we don't know what we're saying, the legal counsel interrupted. But either our records are catastrophically wrong, or someone is sourcing organs through alternative means. Thistlebottom felt his blood chill. Organ trafficking was one of the most heinous crimes imaginable, but it was typically associated with third-world countries, not premier American hospitals. I need to see all your records, he said, and I need to speak with your transplant team. The records were extensive and, on the surface, appeared legitimate. Each transplant had proper documentation, consent forms, compatibility tests. But when Thistlebottom cross-referenced with death certificates from the supposed donor hospitals, the pattern became clear. The donors didn't exist. He interviewed the transplant coordinators first. Most were shocked by the revelations, but one, a nervous woman named Patricia, mentioned something interesting. There's this surgeon, Dr. Bathsheba Higginbotham. She handles a lot of our emergency transplants, the ones that come in during off hours. She always has amazing success rates finding compatible organs quickly. Dr. Bathsheba Higginbotham's personnel file revealed an impressive career. Harvard Medical School, residency at Johns Hopkins, and a specialty in transplant surgery that had made her one of the most sought-after surgeons in Chicago. She primarily worked with wealthy private patients who paid premium prices for her services. Thistlebottom arranged to interview her, but when he arrived at her office, her assistant informed him that Dr. Higginbotham had suddenly taken a leave of absence for a family emergency. When did she leave? Thistlebottom asked. This morning, right after Dr. Marshall's meeting about the investigation. Suspicious timing. Thistlebottom obtained a warrant for Dr. Higginbotham's office and home. Her office was meticulously clean, almost suspiciously so. But in a locked drawer, they found a second set of patient files, ones that didn't match the official hospital records. These files contained photographs of patients Thistlebottom recognized from missing persons reports. Young, healthy individuals who'd vanished from Chicago's streets over the past 2 years. Next to each photo was detailed medical information: blood type, tissue compatibility markers, organ viability assessments. She was cataloging them, Agent Patricia Williams, Thistlebottom's partner, said in horror. Like inventory. Dr. Higginbotham's apartment was empty, but not abandoned. Clothes were missing, toiletries gone, but larger items remained. She'd fled in a hurry, but with planning. On her home computer, which she'd attempted to wipe, forensic specialists recovered fragments of encrypted communications. The messages were coded, but referenced merchandise, delivery schedules, and client requirements. One partially recovered message mentioned a contact named Nebuchadnezzar Snodgrass and an address in an industrial district on Chicago's South Side. The address led to what appeared to be an abandoned medical supply warehouse. But surveillance revealed activity at night, vans coming and going, people in medical scrubs moving equipment. Thistlebottom assembled a tactical team for a raid. They entered at 3 a.m., expecting to find a storage facility. Instead, they found a fully operational surgical center hidden behind the warehouse facade. 3 operating rooms, recovery areas, and most horrifying, a holding area with 12 people in various states of sedation. The victims were all reported missing persons: homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, People society wouldn't immediately miss. They were being kept alive, healthy, waiting, living organ banks for whoever could pay. One victim, barely conscious, grabbed Thistlebottom's arm. "Please," she whispered. They said I was being saved, that I was sick. But I wasn't sick. They made me sick." The woman's name was Maria Gonzalez, reported missing 6 weeks earlier. Her medical chart, found at the facility, showed she was being prepared for kidney removal. The recipient was listed only as Private Client 47. As paramedics evacuated the victims, Thistlebottom's team found something else: a refrigerated room containing organs in transport containers, each labeled with destination hospitals. Not just Chicago Memorial, but prestigious hospitals across the Midwest. The network was vast. In an office area, they discovered detailed records of the operation. Hundreds of donors over 5 years, their organs sold to desperate patients who asked no questions about the source. Prices ranged from $50,000 for a kidney to $250,000 for a heart. The organization had made millions. But Dr. Higginbotham was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed her at the facility just hours before the raid, apparently warned by someone. The investigation had a leak. Thistlebottom returned to Chicago Memorial to dig deeper. If Dr. Higginbotham had been warned, she had allies in the hospital. He began reviewing security footage, looking for patterns, connections. That's when he noticed something odd. Several transplant surgeries performed at night had extra personnel present. People in surgical attire who weren't on the official surgical team. The video quality made identification difficult, but one figure appeared repeatedly, someone with a distinctive limp. Cross-referencing with employee records, Thistlebottom identified the figure as Walter Kowalski, a janitor who'd worked at the hospital for 20 years. When questioned, Kowalski initially denied everything. But when shown the video evidence, he broke down. "I just cleaned up after," he sobbed. "They paid me to keep quiet, to make sure there was no evidence. I needed the money. My wife, she's sick, and insurance wouldn't cover her treatment." Who are they? Dr. Higginbotham had partners. Other doctors, administrators, even some cops. They called themselves the Harvest Collective. They said they were saving lives, that the people they took were worthless anyway, that their organs would go to productive members of society. The twisted utilitarian logic made Thistlebottom sick. They were playing God, deciding who deserved to live based on social value. Kowalski provided names, and the scope of the conspiracy became clear. 3 other surgeons at Chicago Memorial, 2 administrators, and horrifyingly, a detective in Chicago PD's Missing Persons Unit who'd been misdirecting investigations. But the most shocking revelation came when Kowalski mentioned the clients. They weren't all sick, he said. Some needed transplants to survive. But others were healthy. They wanted upgrades, younger organs to extend their lives. There's this whole underground market for enhancement surgery. Enhancement? Rich people paying for younger hearts, lungs, kidneys, not because theirs are failing, but because they want to live longer. Dr. Higginbotham called it preventive replacement. She said it could add 20 years to someone's life. The victim list Thistlebottom compiled was heartbreaking. Over 200 people, all from society's margins, harvested for their organs. Some had survived the initial organ removal only to die from complications. Others had been kept alive for multiple harvests. A kidney first, then liver tissue, bone marrow, whatever could be taken without immediately killing them. One name on the victim list caught his attention: Hephzibah Whippoorwill, a 28-year-old woman who disappeared from a homeless shelter 9 months earlier. According to the records, she'd been a universal donor. O-negative blood, unusual tissue compatibility, They'd kept her for 7 months, taking blood regularly, bone marrow twice, and were preparing to take a kidney when the facility was raided. Thistlebottom found her at Northwestern Memorial, where the victims were being treated. She was traumatized but coherent, and her testimony would prove crucial. "They told us we were special," she said, her voice hollow, "that we were chosen to help important people. They kept us sedated most of the time, but sometimes I was awake during the procedures. I could feel them taking pieces of me. Did you ever see the recipients, the people getting the organs?" "Once. A woman, maybe 60, very elegant. She thanked me for my gift, said my kidney would let her see her grandchildren grow up, as if I had chosen to give it." The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal agencies joined the hunt for Dr. Higginbotham and her associates. The Harvest Collective's financial records, recovered from encrypted servers, revealed payments from some of Chicago's wealthiest families. CEOs, politicians, celebrities, people who'd publicly received transplants with supposedly legitimate donors. One name stood out: City Councilman James Morrison, who'd received a heart transplant 6 months earlier. The official story was that the heart came from a motorcycle accident victim. But the Harvest Collective's records showed it came from a 22-year-old homeless veteran named Marcus Thompson, who'd been specifically selected for his healthy heart and compatibility with Morrison. When questioned, Morrison initially maintained his innocence, claiming he'd trusted his doctors. But when presented with evidence of a $300,000 payment to an account linked to the Harvest Collective, made just days before his surgery, he hired a lawyer and stopped talking. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Every transplant performed in Chicago over the past 5 years was scrutinized. Families who thought their loved ones had been saved by generous donors learned the horrific truth about the source of the organs. But Dr. Higginbotham remained at large. Interpol was alerted. Borders were watched, but she seemed to have vanished completely. Then, 2 weeks after the raid, Thistlebottom received a package at his office. No return address, but postmarked from Mexico City. Inside was a flash drive and a note in elegant handwriting. "Agent Thistlebottom, you see only crime where I see necessity. Every year, thousands die waiting for organs while others die with perfectly viable organs unharvested. I simply corrected this inefficiency. The people I selected were contributing nothing to society. In death, or near death, they finally had value. Their sacrifice saved productive members of society, doctors, teachers, parents. Who are you to say this was wrong? The Harvest Collective was just the beginning. This practice exists worldwide, will continue to exist, because the demand will never cease. You've stopped one operation, but others will take its place. The wealthy will always find ways to extend their lives, and the poor will always be their resource. I've included evidence of other operations in other cities, other countries. Do with it what you will. But know that you're fighting human nature itself, the desire to survive at any cost." Dr. B. Higginbotham. The flash drive contained detailed information about organ harvesting operations in Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and internationally in Brazil, India, and Eastern Europe. It was a global network, and Chicago had been just one node. The information on Dr. Higginbotham's flash drive led to the largest international law enforcement operation in medical crime history. But for Agent Mahershala al-Hashbaz Thistlebottom, the focus remained on Chicago, where the investigation was revealing deeper layers of corruption. 3 weeks after the warehouse raid, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A man calling himself Nebuchadnezzar Snodgrass walked into the FBI field office and asked to speak with Thistlebottom directly. Snodgrass was not what Thistlebottom expected. Instead of a hardened criminal, he found a slight nervous man in his 50s, wearing an expensive but rumpled suit. His hands shook as he sat down in the interrogation room. "I never meant for it to go this far," Snodgrass began without preamble. "I'm not a monster, Agent Thistlebottom. I'm a logistics coordinator. I managed transportation, nothing more. Transportation of human organs illegally harvested from murdered victims," Thistlebottom stated flatly. "They weren't supposed to die," Snodgrass insisted. "The original plan was different. We would take only what could be spared, a kidney, part of a liver, blood, things people could survive without. The victims would be compensated, given new identities, sent to start fresh lives elsewhere." "And what happened to that plan?" Snodgrass's face crumpled. "Greed." Dr. Higginbotham convinced the others that it was inefficient. Why take one kidney when you could take everything? Why risk witnesses when corpses tell no tales? The money was too good, the demand too high. How many people are involved? More than you know. The Harvest Collective is just the Chicago branch. There's a national organization called the Life Extension Network. They coordinate between cities, share resources, protect each other. Snodgrass provided names, addresses, and most importantly, the location of the collective's record storage, a climate-controlled facility in Cicero, disguised as a document management company. He also revealed something that chilled Thistlebottom to the bone. "They have a list," Snodgrass said. "People marked for future harvesting. Not just homeless or vulnerable populations. They've been studying genetic markers, identifying perfect donors for specific clients. Some people on that list don't even know they're being watched, tested, evaluated. Where is this list? Dr. Higginbotham keeps the master copy. But there's a backup at the Cicero facility. The raid on the Cicero facility was conducted that night. Inside, investigators found detailed records going back 15 years. The Harvest Collective had been operating longer than anyone suspected, evolving from a small black market operation into a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The Future Harvest list was horrifying. Over 3,000 names, complete with medical histories obtained through illegal access to hospital databases, genetic profiles from ancestry testing companies that had been hacked, and surveillance notes on daily routines. Some entries had optimal harvest dates listed, when the person would be most vulnerable, least likely to be immediately missed. One entry made Thistlebottom's blood freeze. His own name was on the list, along with his blood type, tissue markers, and a note. Federal agent, high-risk target. Valuable for multiple clients seeking law enforcement biological markers for immunity research. They weren't just harvesting organs anymore. They were harvesting specific biological traits, antibodies from people who'd survived certain diseases, stem cells from young athletes, brain tissue from intellectuals. It was a grotesque catalog of human biological resources. The investigation team immediately began contacting people on the list, warning them of the danger. Many didn't believe it at first. The idea that they'd been marked for organ harvesting seemed like paranoid fantasy. But when shown the detailed surveillance notes about their lives, most accepted protective custody. Meanwhile, financial forensics revealed the collective's money trail. Payments had come from offshore accounts linked to shell companies, but patient investigators traced them back to their sources. The client list read like a who's who of wealthy Americans seeking to cheat death. One client stood out, Richardson Sterling, a pharmaceutical billionaire who'd received 7 organ transplants over the past decade. Each time, he'd claimed hereditary organ failure, but medical experts reviewing his files found no genetic condition that would require such extensive replacement. When federal agents arrived at Sterling's mansion in Lake Forest, they found a macabre scene. Sterling had converted his home into a private medical facility. He had a full-time medical staff, surgical suites, and most disturbing, a young man in a medically induced coma connected to Sterling via blood transfusion equipment. Parabiosis, the attending physician explained after being arrested. Mr. Sterling believed that young blood could reverse aging. The subject is changed every 3 months. The young man was identified as David Park, a 23-year-old who disappeared from a gym 6 weeks earlier. He'd been selected for his exceptional health and compatible blood type. Sterling had been literally draining the youth from him. David survived, though with significant psychological trauma. His testimony revealed that he'd been conscious at times, aware of what was happening but paralyzed, unable to cry out or resist. Sterling's medical team had kept him in a state of living death to preserve the quality of his blood. As more arrests were made, a pattern emerged. The Harvest Collective had created a 2-tier system. Poor and marginalized victims were harvested completely, their organs distributed to multiple recipients. But wealthy victims, those with exceptional genetics or specific desired traits, were kept alive, slowly harvested over time for maximum value. Dr. Bathsheba Higginbotham remained at large, but her associates began to talk. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a surgeon who'd performed dozens of illegal transplants, agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Bathsheba was brilliant, Martinez said during her deposition. She pioneered techniques that mainstream medicine won't achieve for decades. She could make incompatible organs work, prevent rejection without immunosuppressants, even reverse some organ damage before transplantation. Where did she learn these techniques? She said she studied in Eastern Europe after medical school, at institutes that didn't follow Western ethical constraints. She learned from doctors who'd experimented during the Balkan conflicts using war casualties as test subjects. Martinez revealed that Higginbotham had been developing something she called Project Chrysalis, a procedure to completely replace all major organs in a single operation, essentially giving someone an entirely new body while preserving their brain. She said it was the ultimate life extension, Martinez explained. A 70-year-old could have the body of a 20-year-old. She'd already done preliminary work on animals and was looking for the first human subject. Who? Herself. She was going to have her own organs replaced with those from a carefully selected donor, someone young, healthy, genetically superior. She'd been screening candidates for years. The investigation took a personal turn when Thistlebottom received a call at home late one night. The voice was electronically disguised, but the message was clear. Stop the investigation or become part of it. We have resources you can't imagine, reach you can't escape. Your wife Sarah visits the grocery store every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Your daughter Emma takes dance classes on Thursdays. We know everything about you. Thistlebottom immediately moved his family to a federal safe house, but the threat illustrated the collective's reach. They had surveillance capabilities that rivaled intelligence agencies, likely through members embedded in telecommunications and security companies. A break came from digital forensics. The collective had been using an encrypted communication app they believed was untraceable. But NSA cryptographers managed to crack it, revealing thousands of messages between members. One thread discussed the farm, a location where premium products were being cultivated. The messages suggested it was somewhere rural, within driving distance of Chicago, and housed at least 50 products. Using cell tower data and traffic analysis, they narrowed the location to a 200-acre property in rural Indiana, ostensibly a rehabilitation center for addiction recovery. Satellite imagery showed multiple buildings, medical facilities inappropriate for a simple rehab center, and armed security. The raid required coordination between FBI, DEA, ATF, and local law enforcement. They moved in at dawn, expecting resistance. What they found exceeded their worst expectations. The facility was indeed a farm, a human farm. 53 people, all young and healthy, were being kept in a state of controlled wellness. They exercised daily, ate carefully managed diets, received regular medical care, all to maintain the quality of their organs. But these weren't kidnapped victims, at least not in the traditional sense. They'd been recruited from addiction centers, homeless shelters, and psychiatric facilities with promises of free treatment and a fresh start. Once there, they were told they were part of a medical study, that they were helping advance transplant science. Many had been psychologically conditioned to believe they were volunteers, heroes even, future saviors of important people. The conditioning was so complete that some resisted rescue, insisting they needed to stay to complete their mission. Among them was a young woman named Rebecca Foster, whose journal provided insight into the psychological manipulation. Day 43, the doctors say, "I'm special, that my organs could save a dozen lives. They've shown me videos of children dying without transplants. How can I be selfish with my body when it could mean so much to others?" Day 98, I've been matched. A mother of 3 needs my liver. Part of it, they say, I'll regenerate. I'm scared but excited. My life will mean something. Day 156. The surgery was postponed. The client found a better match. I'm disappointed. When will it be my turn to be useful? The psychological torture was as severe as any physical harm. These people had been convinced that their only value was in their organs, that their deaths would be more meaningful than their lives. Dr. Marcus Webb, the facility's director, was arrested without incident. He seemed genuinely confused by the charges. "We're saving lives," he insisted. "Every donor here has consented. We provide them with better health care than they've ever received, purpose they've never had. How is this different from military service where young people risk their lives for others?" The twisted logic was consistent throughout the organization. They'd convinced themselves they were heroes, that they were solving the organ shortage crisis through innovative means. The fact that their innovation involved murdering innocent people seemed lost on them. As the facility was processed, investigators found something else, a medical suite more advanced than most hospitals. This was where Dr. Higginbotham had been performing her experimental procedures. Equipment for gene editing, organ modification, even attempts at organ cloning from harvested tissue. A partially destroyed hard drive revealed videos of procedures that looked like science fiction. Organs being modified outside the body, enhanced with synthetic components, made superior to natural organs. Hearts that could beat 200 times a minute without damage, lungs that could process carbon monoxide, kidneys that could filter heavy metals. She wasn't just harvesting organs, a medical examiner said in horror. She was trying to create superhuman ones. One video showed Higginbotham herself, addressing an audience of masked figures, presumably wealthy clients. "Evolution is too slow," she said in the recording. "Natural selection takes millennia, but with directed biological enhancement we can achieve in 1 generation what nature would take 1,000 to accomplish. Those with the resources to afford it will become literally superior to baseline humans." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just organ trafficking. It was an attempt to create a biological caste system, where the wealthy could purchase genetic superiority. Among the facility's records, they found correspondence with biotechnology companies, military contractors, even foreign governments interested in creating enhanced soldiers. The organ harvesting had been funding research into human augmentation on a scale that defied belief. But the most disturbing discovery came from the facility's basement. Behind a concealed door, investigators found a cryogenic storage unit containing 12 bodies in various states of dissection. These weren't victims, they were experiments. Attempts to create what Higginbotham called chimeras, humans with organs from multiple donors, living patchworks of different genetic materials. None had survived more than a few days, but the attempts continued. Each failure was meticulously documented, adjustments made, new attempts planned. It was the methodical work of someone who saw human beings as machines to be optimized. Thistlebottom stood in that cold storage room, looking at the results of unchecked ambition and absent morality. These weren't just murders, they were attempts to redefine humanity itself. The revelations from the farm sent shockwaves through law enforcement and medical communities worldwide. Agent Mahershala Hashbaz Thistlebottom found himself leading an investigation that had expanded far beyond organ trafficking into human experimentation and biological enhancement. But Dr. Bathsheba Higginbotham remained at large, and intercepted communications suggested she was planning something significant. 2 months after the farm raid, a woman was admitted to Rush University Medical Center in Chicago with severe organ failure. She gave her name as Sarah Mitchell, but something about her seemed off to the attending physician, Dr. James Patterson. Her organs were failing, but not naturally, Dr. Patterson later told investigators. It was like they'd been designed to fail, programmed with an expiration date. Blood tests revealed unusual synthetic compounds, similar to those found in victims from the farm. Patterson immediately contacted the FBI. By the time Thistlebottom arrived, Sarah Mitchell was in critical condition but conscious. "I was supposed to be perfect," she gasped through labored breathing. Dr. Higginbotham promised I'd be the future, but the organs, they're rejecting me, or I'm rejecting them. I don't know anymore. Her medical examination revealed the horrifying truth. She'd undergone extensive organ replacement. Heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, even sections of intestine. But these weren't normal transplants. The organs had been modified, enhanced with synthetic components and genetic alterations. Her body was trying to reject them, but immunosuppressants weren't working because the organs weren't entirely biological. "Who are you, really?" Thistlebottom asked gently. "I was Jennifer Liu," she whispered, "a medical student. I volunteered for Dr. Higginbotham's research. She said I'd be the first of a new kind of human, but I'm dying. The enhancements are killing me." Jennifer provided crucial information. Dr. Higginbotham had established a new facility after fleeing Chicago, somewhere in Michigan. She'd gathered a team of researchers who shared her vision of human enhancement through organ modification. They called themselves the Evolution Institute. "She has dozens of volunteers," Jennifer said. "People who believe in her vision. They're all undergoing procedures. She's trying to create a community of enhanced humans." "Where exactly in Michigan?" "Near Traverse City, an old sanatorium converted into a research facility. But Agent Thistlebottom, you have to understand, not everyone there is there willingly. She has subjects, people she's experimenting on without consent." Jennifer died 3 days later, her enhanced organs finally failing completely. The autopsy revealed the full extent of Higginbotham's modifications: artificial valves in the heart, synthetic filters in the kidneys, genetically modified liver cells that produced non-standard proteins. It was brilliant and horrifying in equal measure. The Michigan State Police coordinated with the FBI for surveillance of the Traverse City area. The old Traverse City State Hospital, abandoned since 1989, showed signs of recent activity: new electrical lines, deliveries of medical supplies, vehicles coming and going at odd hours. Thermal imaging revealed at least 60 people inside the complex. But a raid was complicated by the possibility of innocent victims who might be in critical medical condition. They needed more intelligence. The break came from an unexpected source. A man named Timothy Morrison contacted the FBI, claiming to be Dr. Higginbotham's former research partner. He was terrified, in hiding, and wanted protection in exchange for information. Morrison met Thistlebottom at a secure location in Detroit. He was gaunt, paranoid, constantly checking windows and doors. Bathsheba has gone beyond enhancement, he said. She's trying to create a new species. Homo superior, she calls them. Humans with organs that can process any toxin, hearts that can pump for 200 years, brains with enhanced neural connections. That's science fiction. That's what I thought. But she's making progress. The failures are horrible. People dying in agony as their modified organs consume them from within. But some are surviving, maybe 1 in 20, and those who survive are different. Different how? Stronger, faster, more resistant to disease and injury, but also less human in some indefinable way. Like, the modifications change more than just their bodies. Their personalities shift, their empathy decreases. They become cold, calculating. Morrison provided detailed intelligence about the facility's layout, security, and personnel. He also revealed something that made the situation urgent. She's planning a demonstration, he said. She has a list of medical professionals, scientists, and investors she's invited to witness her successes. She intends to perform a complete organ replacement on herself, on stage, to prove her techniques work. It's scheduled for next week. Why would she risk exposure like that? Because she believes she's already won. She has contacts in government, military, pharmaceutical companies who protect her. She thinks she's untouchable. The FBI mobilized immediately. But 3 days before the planned raid, something unexpected happened. Hepzibah Whippoorwill, the survivor from the original Chicago facility, contacted Thistlebottom with disturbing news. "I've been having dreams," she said. "No, not dreams. Memories. Things they did to me that I'd blocked out. Agent Thistlebottom, they put something in me. Not just took things out, but put something in." Medical examination revealed a small device implanted near her spine, so small it had been missed in previous examinations. It was a tracking device, but more than that. It was also collecting biological data, transmitting it somewhere. "She's been monitoring me," Hepzibah realized in horror, "studying how my body recovered, using me as a test subject even after I escaped." Technical analysis of the device revealed it was transmitting to a receiver in Chicago. Not at any of the facilities they'd raided, but at a high-rise apartment building in the Gold Coast. The apartment was registered to a shell company, but surveillance revealed someone was living there. Thistlebottom decided to investigate personally. The apartment's occupant was a woman in her 30s, elegant, professional, who left every morning for a job at a biotech firm. Nothing about her seemed suspicious until facial recognition software made a match that seemed impossible. It was Dr. Bathsheba Higginbotham, but she looked 20 years younger than she should. "It can't be her," Agent Williams said. "Higginbotham is in her 60s. This woman is maybe 35. "Unless she succeeded," Thistlebottom said quietly. "Unless she already performed the procedure on herself." They maintained surveillance while the Michigan raid was prepared. The woman lived a normal life: work, gym, restaurants, but thermal imaging of her apartment revealed medical equipment, refrigeration units consistent with organ storage, and most tellingly, a communication setup linking her to the Michigan facility. The raids were coordinated for the same moment, 4 a.m. on a Thursday morning. In Michigan, tactical teams surrounded the old sanatorium. In Chicago, Thistlebottom led a smaller team to the Gold Coast apartment. The woman who answered the door looked nothing like the Dr. Higginbotham from medical records, but her voice was unmistakable. "Agent Thistlebottom," she said calmly, "I've been expecting you. Please, come in. Would you like to see what humanity's future looks like?" She was under arrest, but showed no concern. As they searched her apartment, she spoke conversationally. "I've replaced 90% of my organs over the past 2 years," she said, "each one designed to be superior to the original. My heart can pump continuously for 300 years. My liver can process any toxin known to man. My kidneys could filter radioactive water. I am evolution accelerated." "You're a murderer," Thistlebottom stated. "I'm a pioneer." Every medical advancement requires sacrifice. The first heart transplants were considered murder. The first vaccines were called poison. History will vindicate me. In her apartment, they found detailed records of her self-experimentation. She'd undergone 17 separate procedures, replacing organs one at a time, using techniques she'd perfected on unwilling subjects. The donors were all young, healthy individuals who'd been selected for specific genetic traits. Each organ was chosen from the best possible donor, she explained, as if discussing a shopping trip. The heart from a marathon runner, the lungs from a pearl diver, the liver from someone with natural immunity to hepatitis. I am a composite of humanity's best features. The Michigan raid was simultaneously uncovering horrors. The facility contained 43 volunteers in various stages of enhancement procedures and 18 unwilling subjects kept in medical comas. The volunteers were true believers, convinced that Higginbotham was leading them to transcendence. Many refused to leave even when offered rescue. One volunteer, despite being in critical condition from a failed kidney enhancement, insisted, "You don't understand. Dr. Higginbotham is giving us the chance to be more than human. Pain is temporary. Evolution is forever." The unwilling subjects were different. They'd been homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, people grabbed from the margins of society. They were being used as test subjects for the most experimental procedures, the ones with the highest failure rates. In the facility's laboratory, investigators found something that defied medical understanding. Dr. Higginbotham had been growing organs, not in the traditional sense of organ cultivation, but creating hybrid organs that had never existed in nature. A liver that also functioned as a secondary heart, lungs that could extract oxygen from water, kidneys that produced stem cells. She was trying to redesign the human body, a medical examiner said in awe and horror, not just improve it, but fundamentally restructure it. Dr. Higginbotham's arrest made international news, but the legal case was complicated. Her volunteers insisted they'd consented to the procedures. Some of the enhanced individuals showed no desire to be cured of their modifications. And most disturbingly, several governments expressed interest in her research for military applications. During her interrogation, Higginbotham showed no remorse. "In 50 years, everyone will be enhanced," she said. "Those who refuse will be evolutionary dead ends. I've simply accelerated the inevitable. You killed innocent people. I transformed them. Their bodies served a purpose greater than they ever could have achieved on their own. A homeless addict's organs saving a brilliant scientist. A criminal's heart beating in the chest of a humanitarian. I gave their lives meaning." Her twisted philosophy had infected others. 3 of her research associates refused to cooperate, insisting they were part of a grander vision. The volunteers formed a support group, but it quickly became apparent they were planning to continue the work. Then came the most disturbing revelation. Analysis of Higginbotham's medical records showed that her brain had also been modified. Not replaced, that was still impossible, but enhanced with synthetic neural pathways and artificial neurotransmitters. She's augmented her own cognition, a neuroscientist explained. Increased processing speed, enhanced memory, possibly even altered consciousness. We don't fully understand what she's done to herself. This explained her calm demeanor, her lack of normal human emotional responses. She'd modified not just her body, but her mind, becoming something that looked human, but thought in ways that were fundamentally different. During transport to federal prison, Higginbotham made a chilling statement to Thistlebottom. "You think you've stopped me, but I'm just one of many. The technology exists now, the knowledge is out there. Others will continue the work. In China, in Russia, in hidden facilities you'll never find. Humanity's evolution has begun, Agent Thistlebottom. You can't stop evolution." The investigation revealed she was right. Similar research was being conducted in at least 12 countries, some with government backing. The organ harvesting had been funding a global movement toward human enhancement, and shutting down one operation barely slowed it. Hephzibah Whippoorwill and other survivors formed an advocacy group, pushing for stricter regulations on organ transplantation and genetic modification. But they faced opposition from those who saw enhancement as the future, including some who'd been Higginbotham's victims but now embraced their modifications. She was evil, Hephzibah said at a press conference. But she was also right about one thing. We can't go back. The technology exists. The question now is how we use it ethically, how we ensure it doesn't require murder and exploitation. The trial of Dr. Bathsheba Higginbotham became one of the most complex legal proceedings in American history. Her defense team argued that she was legally insane, that her self-modifications had altered her brain chemistry to the point where she couldn't distinguish right from wrong. The prosecution, led by federal prosecutor Janet Mills, painted her as a calculating murderer who knew exactly what she was doing. Agent Mahershala Hashbaz Thistlebottom was the key witness, presenting evidence gathered over months of investigation. But during his testimony, something disturbing happened. Dr. Higginbotham, sitting calmly in the defendant's chair, began experiencing what appeared to be organ failure. "It's starting," she said calmly, even as blood began trickling from her nose. "The modifications aren't stable long-term. I estimate I have perhaps 6 months before complete system failure." The court was thrown into chaos. Higginbotham was rushed to a secure medical facility where doctors confirmed her enhanced organs were beginning to break down at the cellular level. The synthetic components were being rejected, the genetic modifications causing cascading failures. "I miscalculated," she told Thistlebottom during a bedside interview. "The human body has limits I didn't account for. But my successors will learn from my mistakes." "What successors?" She smiled, a chilling expression on her increasingly gaunt face. "You don't think I was working alone, do you? I trained dozens of surgeons in my techniques. They're out there, improving on my work." The investigation suddenly took on new urgency. Using Higginbotham's communications and financial records, the FBI identified 17 doctors worldwide who'd trained under her. Most had returned to their home countries, Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, where they were continuing the research legally or in legal gray areas. But 3 remained in the United States, working under assumed identities. The manhunt for them led to a series of raids across the country, uncovering smaller but equally disturbing operations. In Phoenix, Dr. Michael Roberts, an alias, was found running a clinic that promised life extension therapy to wealthy retirees. He was using modified organs from young victims to replace aging organs in elderly patients. 13 victims were found in his facility, kept in medically induced comas. In Seattle, Dr. Sarah Kim, another alias, had been targeting specific ethnic groups, believing that certain genetic populations had superior organs for harvesting. Her operation was smaller but more insidious, as she'd been working as a legitimate transplant surgeon while secretly selecting victims from her patient lists. In Boston, the most disturbing discovery was made. Dr. James Thompson, also an alias, had been experimenting with consciousness transfer, attempting to transplant not just organs but entire nervous systems. His failures had resulted in 17 deaths, each victim experiencing what survivors described as consciousness fragmentation before dying in agony. Back in Chicago, Hepzibah Whippoorwill had become an unexpected leader in the survivor community. She testified before Congress, pushing for legislation to regulate experimental organ procedures and protect vulnerable populations from exploitation. "They saw us as spare parts," she told the Senate Committee on Health. "Not humans with hopes, dreams, families. We were inventory to them. This cannot be allowed to continue." Her testimony was powerful, but she faced opposition from unexpected sources. Several biotech companies argued that over-regulation would stifle legitimate research into organ replacement and life extension. They claimed Higginbotham's crimes shouldn't taint an entire field of medical research. Meanwhile, Nebuchadnezzar Snodgrass, who'd been cooperating with authorities, revealed more about the international organ trafficking network. His information led to raids in 14 countries, shutting down operations that had been running for decades. "The demand will never stop," Snodgrass told Thistlebottom. "As long as people fear death, as long as the wealthy can afford to buy life, someone will be willing to sell it. We stopped one network, but others are already forming." He was right. Within months of the Harvest Collective's dismantling, new operations were detected. They were smaller, more careful, but they were there. The dark web became a marketplace for organs, with cryptocurrencies making transactions nearly untraceable. Dr. Higginbotham's condition continued to deteriorate. Her enhanced organs were failing one by one, each failure more painful than the last. She documented everything, insisting it was valuable scientific data. "Pain is just information," she said through gritted teeth as her modified liver began shutting down. "My suffering will teach the next generation how to succeed where I failed." 3 months into her incarceration, she made a request to see Thistlebottom. When he arrived at the secure medical facility, he found her connected to multiple machines, barely alive, but still conscious. "I want to make a deal," she said. "Full disclosure of all my research, every technique, every contact in exchange for one thing." "You're in no position to negotiate." "I'm dying, Agent. Within days. But I can die with my secrets, or I can give you everything. Names, locations, techniques that could actually save lives if used ethically. What do you want?" "I want my body donated to science. Real science. Let legitimate researchers study what I've done, learn from it. Don't let my work die with me." It was a twisted request, but the FBI saw the value. Higginbotham's modifications, while unethical in origin, had produced genuine medical breakthroughs. Understanding them could advance transplant medicine by decades. The deal was made. Over 3 days, Higginbotham disclosed everything. Hidden facilities, bank accounts, contact lists, and most valuable detailed medical procedures that had never been documented. She revealed techniques for preventing organ rejection that mainstream medicine hadn't discovered, methods for organ preservation that could save thousands of lives. "The knowledge itself isn't evil," she insisted. "It's how it's obtained and applied. Future doctors will use my techniques to save lives legally, ethically. My legacy will be redemption through application. She died on the 4th day, her final enhanced organ, her heart, beating exactly 247,293 times before stopping, a number she'd predicted with eerie accuracy. Her autopsy was conducted by a team of international medical experts. What they found revolutionized transplant medicine. Her techniques, while obtained through murder and exploitation, contained genuine innovations. Within years, modified versions of her procedures were saving lives in legitimate hospitals worldwide. The ethical debate was fierce. Could medical knowledge obtained through evil means be used for good? Some argued all her research should be destroyed. Others claimed that ignoring it would mean her victims died for nothing. Hephzibah. Whippoorwill weighed in with unexpected wisdom. The knowledge exists, she said. We can't unknow it, but we can ensure it's never obtained this way again. Use what she learned, but never forget how she learned it. Let every life saved be a memorial to those she murdered. The trials continued for 2 years. In total, 147 people were convicted in connection with the Harvest Collective and related operations. Sentences ranged from 5 years for minor accomplices to life without parole for the primary perpetrators. Richardson Sterling, the pharmaceutical billionaire who'd been using young blood for parabiosis, died before his trial, his body rejecting the final transfusion in what doctors called biological justice. His estate was liquidated, with funds going to victims' families. The farm in Indiana was converted into a memorial and research center, dedicated to ethical advancement in transplant medicine. Each building bore plaques with the names of victims, ensuring they wouldn't be forgotten. But the story didn't end with convictions and memorials. 3 years after Higginbotham's death, Thistlebottom received a package at his home. No return address, no postmark, just like before. Inside was a USB drive containing a single video file. The video showed a surgical suite, location unknown. A figure in surgical scrubs, face obscured, was performing an organ transplant with techniques Thistlebottom recognized as Higginbotham's. But the precision was greater, the modifications more advanced. "Agent Thistlebottom?" a electronically disguised voice said. "The teacher is dead, but the students survive. We've learned from her mistakes. No more wholesale harvesting, no more unwilling victims. We work only with volunteers now, those who understand the vision. Evolution continues, but ethically. You won this battle, but the war for human transcendence has just begun." The video ended with coordinates, a location in Switzerland, where human enhancement research was legal under certain conditions. When Interpol investigated, they found a legitimate research facility, properly licensed, using volunteer subjects who'd given informed consent. Everything was legal, even if the ethics remained questionable. Thistlebottom realized that Higginbotham had been right about one thing. The genie was out of the bottle. The technology for human enhancement through organ modification existed, and stopping its abuse while allowing its legitimate use would be an ongoing battle. 5 years after the initial investigation, Thistlebottom retired from the FBI. The Harvest Collective case had made his career but also haunted him. He'd seen the worst of human ambition, the price of playing God with human bodies. In his retirement speech, he said, "We stopped a monster, but we also glimpsed the future. A future where the line between healing and enhancement, between medicine and modification becomes increasingly blurred. Our job now is to ensure that future doesn't require innocent victims." Hephzibah Whippoorwill went on to become a bioethics professor, teaching future doctors about the importance of consent and human dignity. She still carried scars, physical and mental, from her ordeal, but she transformed trauma into purpose. "They tried to take everything from me," she said in her inaugural lecture, "but they failed to take my humanity. That's something no surgery can remove, no modification can improve. Our humanity is what makes us who we are, not our organs." Nebuchadnezzar Snodgrass served 10 years in federal prison, cooperating throughout his sentence. Upon release, he disappeared, leaving only a note, seeking redemption in anonymity. The organ trafficking networks were disrupted, but not destroyed. Like any criminal enterprise driven by desperate demand and enormous profits, they adapted, evolved, survived. But they were more careful now, knowing that people like Thistlebottom were watching. Dr. Higginbotham's research, sanitized and ethicized, led to breakthrough treatments for organ failure. Synthetic organ components, originally designed for enhancement, were adapted for therapeutic use. Genetic modifications she'd pioneered were refined to treat hereditary diseases. Her legacy became one of unintended good arising from intentional evil. But in dark corners of the medical world, in countries with lax regulations, in facilities hidden from oversight, the work continued. Not just organ harvesting, but human enhancement. The dream of transcending biological limitations. Some volunteers, some victims, all part of an ongoing experiment in what it means to be human. Thistlebottom kept a photo on his desk in retirement, the survivors from the Chicago warehouse, taken at a reunion 5 years later. Most had rebuilt their lives, found purpose, refused to be defined by what had been done to them. It reminded him that while evil was persistent, so was human resilience. The last entry in his case journal read, "The Harvest Collective is finished, but the harvest continues. Somewhere, someone is being valued only for their organs. Somewhere, someone is playing God with human flesh. Somewhere, the future is being built on a foundation of blood. We stopped it here for now, but vigilance is eternal. The moment we look away, the moment we forget, is the moment it begins again." Late at night, in cities across the world, surgical suites hidden from law enforcement continued the work. Evolution, as Higginbotham had said, couldn't be stopped. It could only be directed, controlled, or corrupted. The question that remained was not whether humans would be enhanced, but how and at what cost. The victims of the Harvest Collective had paid that cost involuntarily. Their sacrifice exposed a dark truth about human nature, that some would always be willing to kill to live longer, to steal life from the young to extend their own. But it also revealed another truth, that others would fight to stop them, that justice, while slow, was persistent. In Chicago, the organ trafficking networks never fully recovered from the FBI investigation. The city's hospitals implemented new oversight procedures. Its law enforcement remained vigilant, its people aware. The shadows where the Harvest Collective had operated were illuminated, making it harder for such evil to take root again. But shadows have a way of returning when the light moves on. And somewhere in those returning shadows, someone was preparing the next evolution of the harvest. The cycle, as always, continued.